My name is Bridget Kaufman. I am 28 years old. I know exactly how many hours of my Christmas had already been handed out, because I counted them while I was standing in my parents' hallway holding a roasting pan. 22 hours, 3 days, 7 children. Nobody in that kitchen had asked me for a single one of those hours, and nobody in that kitchen thought they needed to. My mother was saying that I could take the basement room, since somebody had to be down there with the little ones. My father said that paying holiday rates for a sitter would be throwing money out the window when I was right there. My sister said she had already told everyone it was covered. Here is the part that made it worse. I schedule people for a living. Every weekday morning I sit in a small office off a parts warehouse, and I put 14 heating technicians into half-hour boxes on a whiteboard. There is a rule in my line of work that nobody breaks. You do not put a man's name in a box he has not signed for. If you do, he does not show up. And that is your fault, not his. Every box on my board has a signature line. The box with my name in it, on the calendar taped to my mother's refrigerator, did not. At 9:15 on the morning of Christmas Eve, my mother was screaming into a phone in that same kitchen while I stood at a boarding gate 4,000 miles away from her. What came out of that phone call was not one lie. It was 3. The first one cost my sister money. The second had been running for 4 years and had been repeated in a church parking lot. The third had nothing to do with Christmas at all. It belonged to the only person in that family who had ever asked me if I was all right. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the hallway. It was the 18th of December, a Thursday, a little after 4 in the afternoon. My mother had sent the roasting pan home with me after Thanksgiving and had asked for it back twice, so I stopped by on my way home from work. I let myself in through the side door the way I always did, coat on, keys in hand, planning to be gone in 5 minutes. The kitchen smelled like anise cookies. My mother burns the bottoms of the second batch every year. And that smell is one of the few things from my childhood I have never gotten tired of. I stopped in the hallway because I heard my own name. Through the doorway I could see part of the room. My mother was at the table with a printed sheet in front of her and a pen in her hand. My father was leaning against the counter with a mug. Mary Beth was standing at the refrigerator with her back to me, and she was pointing at something taped to the door. It was a calendar, not a store calendar. A grid she had made herself and printed in color, the 23rd through the 25th in columns. The hours running down the side. I make one of those every morning of my life. She was walking them through it. Arrival times. Who was bringing what? The gift exchange at 7. The photograph on the stairs before anyone got a plate. The hotel dinner at 6:30 on the 24th. 6 adults. Booked back in October. And then she got to the columns underneath, and my name was in them. Bridget downstairs after 5. Bridget with the kids during the exchange. Bridget on the 25th from 8 to 12 while the adults rest. My mother did not object to any of it. She adjusted it. She said the folding beds were already down in the basement, both of them, and that I would want to be close by if one of the little ones woke up in a strange house. She said it in the tone of a woman doing me a kindness. My father said the thing about the money. He said it easily, without any heat. The way he talks about tire prices. He said hiring somebody at holiday rates would be ridiculous when Bridget is right there. That is the sentence I keep coming back to. Not the schedule. The way he said my name in it. He said it the way you would say the name of a folding table you keep in the garage. Something useful. Something you already own and do not have to think about. Mary Beth said she had told the Lindstroms and Aunt Peg and everybody at church that childcare was handled. Then she said, and I heard this clearly, that I never had anything going on anyway. I stood there with the pan in both hands and did the arithmetic, because that is what my brain does when it is trying not to feel anything. 5 to 9 on the 23rd, 7 to 11 the next morning, then the whole hotel dinner block, then bedtime. 4 hours on Christmas morning, 22 hours, give or take, and 7 children, 4 of whom I could not have picked out of a photograph. At work, 22 hours has a number attached to it. It has a rate, an after-hours multiplier, and a holiday surcharge, and I quote all 3 of them over the phone to strangers without blinking. In that kitchen, 22 hours had a different word attached to it: help. I did not go in. I have thought about why for a long time since, and it was not fear. It was that the conversation was already over. There was nothing left to interrupt. They were not deciding whether I would do it. They were deciding what time I should start. I set the roasting pan down on the back step, quietly, and I walked to my car. I sat there in the driveway with the engine off and my breath fogging the windshield. Their kitchen window was warm and yellow, and I could see my mother's shoulder moving as she wrote something on the sheet, and I realized I was still counting. Here is what I mean by counting. If a customer calls our office at 6 in the evening on the 24th of December because their furnace has quit, I have a number ready before they finish the sentence. Base rate, after hours multiplier, holiday surcharge. I say it out loud, plainly, and I write it on the ticket. And nobody has ever once told me that putting a price on a man's evening was cold of me. Sitting in that driveway, my brain ran the same arithmetic on my own 3 days. And then it stopped, because there was nowhere to write the number down. That is the whole problem in one sentence. The work was identical. The paperwork did not exist. I want to be fair to my family here, or at least accurate, because the version of this story where they are monsters is not the true one, and it is not the interesting one either. Nobody in that kitchen woke up that morning planning to use me. That is what took me so long to see. There was no plot. There was a habit, and habits do not feel like decisions to the people who have them, which is why I need to tell you how the habit started. My grandmother lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Olathe, about 20 minutes from us. Delphine Kaufman, my father's mother, though nobody has called her Delphine since the Ford administration. I spent most of my summers on her carpet between the ages of 6 and 12, because my mother had 2 other children and a school office to run, and because Grandma Dell was the only adult in my life who did not seem to be in a hurry. She kept her sewing things in a butter cookie tin, one of those blue ones with the gold ring of cookies printed on the lid, the kind that come out at Christmas and end up in every house in this country holding something other than cookies. Hers had thread in it, and a pin cushion shaped like a tomato, and about 40 loose buttons that did not match anything. I opened that tin every single time I was in her apartment, from the time I could reach the shelf. There was never a cookie in it. I kept opening it anyway. That was Grandma Dell. Nothing in her house was what the label said it was, and she never apologized for it. She was also the only person in my family who asked me what I wanted before she told me what I was doing. She would say, "We can go to the library, or we can shell peas on the porch. Which do you feel like?" I did not understand at 6 years old that I was being handed something rare. I understood it at 28, sitting in a driveway, listening to 3 adults distribute my holiday among themselves. The habit started when I was 11. We were supposed to go to the state fair. My father had bought the tickets and Mary Beth wanted to ride the swings and Colin was 4 and had a fever, so somebody had to stay home. My mother looked at the 3 of us and made a face like she was weighing something, and Mary Beth started crying before anyone said a word. I did not cry. I said it was fine. I did not care about the swings anyway, which was a lie. and my mother put her hand on my head and said, "You are so easy." She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. I was 11, and I had just been told the thing that made me valuable. And for the next 17 years, I made absolutely sure it stayed true. Easy is not a personality. It is a job description, and once you accept it, nobody ever reads you a new one. By the time I was in high school, I was the one who stayed with Colin. In college, I was the one who drove home when the water heater went out. After I got the job at Halverson, I was the one with the flexible hours, which is not remotely what the word flexible means, but that is how it got used. And here is the thing about being the easy one that I could not have explained to you before that December. It is not that they thought less of me. It is that they stopped thinking about me at all. My time became like the folding table in the garage. Nobody praises the folding table. Nobody thanks it. Nobody wonders whether it had other plans. They know where it is, and they get it out when there are more people than chairs. I sat there long enough that my windshield fogged over from the inside, and I had to wipe it with my sleeve to see their kitchen light. I tried to name one time they had moved something for me, not a birthday, not a card, an actual rearrangement. A dinner pushed back because of my shift. A holiday shifted an hour because of my drive. Anything. I could not come up with one. Not because they were cruel, because it had never come up. In 28 years, my schedule had never once been the thing that had to be worked around, and so nobody in that house had ever had to practice it. Then I asked myself the question that ended up costing my family about $3,000 and one Christmas. If being loved in that house meant being available, then what exactly was the difference between me and the sitter they had just canceled? I did not have an answer. I still do not, except for the obvious one, which is that the sitter gets paid and gets to go home. I turned the key. The heater came on cold and loud. I backed out of the driveway of the house I grew up in, and I got about 4 blocks before I pulled into the lot of a closed hardware store and sat there with my hands on the wheel. Because I had remembered something. 3 weeks earlier, my friend Marisol had called me about a condo in Hawaii, and I had told her no. Before I tell you about that call, you need to see what my days look like, or none of what I did next will make sense. Halverson Mechanical does heating and cooling for about half of Johnson County. 14 technicians, 9 vans, 2 guys who only do commercial rooftops, and 1 dispatcher, which is me. My office is a room off the parts warehouse with a window that does not open and a white board that takes up an entire wall. The board is the company. Everything else is paperwork. Down the left side are the 14 names. Across the top are the half-hour blocks. 6 in the morning to 8 at night. My job is to fill those blocks in a way that gets a family with a dead furnace warm before dark, without sending a man 40 miles in the wrong direction. I am good at it in the way nobody outside the trade can see. When I do it perfectly, nothing happens and nobody notices. There is one rule on that board that does not bend, and every dispatcher in this business learns it the same way, by breaking it once. You do not put a man in a box he has not agreed to. Not because it is rude, because it does not work. Write Dave Munoz down for a Saturday rotation without calling Dave Munoz. And Saturday morning you have a cold customer and a technician at his kid's tournament. And nobody blames Dave. They blame whoever filled in the box. We have a column on the printed version for exactly that reason. Last column, far right, narrow, initials. It is the least interesting part of the whole document, and it is the only part that makes the rest of it real. The Monday before all of this. The 14th. I took a call at 10 after 7 in the evening from a man in Lenexa whose furnace had gone out with his wife recovering from surgery. I pulled up the after-hours rate and I read it to him the way I have read it 300 times. $285 to put a technician on his porch tonight, plus parts, plus labor at the evening rate. He did not argue. He did not tell me I was heartless for charging a family $285 10 days before Christmas. He said thank God, and gave me his address, and asked if the guy wanted coffee. That is the part I want you to sit with. A stranger in Lenexa understood, without being told, that a man leaving his own house at 7 in the evening in December costs money. My father spent 30 years climbing utility poles and could not apply that idea to his own daughter. Now let me tell you the thing I had never told anybody in my family. 2 years before that Christmas, I signed up for an operations management certificate at the community college. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 16 weeks, $740 out of my own checking account. It was the thing that moves a dispatcher into a coordinator job, which at a company our size means a desk, a title, and about $9,000 a year. I did not have. I made it through 4 sessions. The 5th week, Mary Beth needed me 2 Saturdays in a row, and the 2nd Saturday ran into the Sunday, and I lost a full unit, and the group project that went with it, I tried to catch up. I sat in that classroom the following Tuesday completely lost, and I did the math on whether I could pass, and I withdrew on the Thursday. The $740 was not refundable after week 2. I remember reading that line on the receipt in my car and feeling stupid, which is exactly the wrong feeling, and the reason I never told anyone. Not my mother, not Mary Beth. I told my supervisor I had a scheduling conflict, which was true in the most humiliating possible way. I want to say something to you here, before we go any further, because we are about to get into the part of this story that gets loud. I do not know where you are right now or what time it is there, but I would like to know whether the house you are sitting in is as quiet as you would like it to be, and whether anybody in it has asked you that question lately. Tell me. I have been carrying this story around for a while, and I am curious how far from Kansas it manages to travel. All right, back to the board. That same night, after the Lenexa call, I stayed late to build the holiday rotation. Christmas week is the worst week of our year. Every furnace in the metro decides to die the moment the temperature drops, and every technician has somewhere to be. Building that rotation takes me 4 hours and about 9 phone calls, because I ask all 14 of them, every single one. What are your days? What can you cover, what absolutely cannot move? Kevin's daughter was flying in from Denver. Ty had in-laws until the 26th. Dave wanted the 24th and not the 25th. I built it around them. And when I printed it Tuesday morning, every man on it signed the last column before he took his van out. 4 days later, I stood in my mother's hallway and looked at the other piece of paper, the one taped to her refrigerator in color, with the hours down the side and my name in 3 separate columns. Same grid, same idea, same handwriting habits. Since my mother is the one who taught me to make lists, only one of them had a place for the person to say yes. So that is what I was thinking about in the parking lot of a closed hardware store on the 18th of December. With the heater roaring and my phone in my hand, I did not call Marisol right away. First, I made myself go back through the last 4 years, item by item, the way I would go back through a service history before I told a customer that the problem was not the part. I needed to know whether I was overreacting. I was not. Start with last Christmas, because that one still has a photograph attached to it. Mary Beth handed me a list before I had my coat off. Snacks at 6. Baths at 7:30. Keep everybody downstairs until the exchange is over. I actually laughed. I thought she was doing a bit. She looked at me with real confusion and said, "You knew we needed you. I spent that evening sitting on the floor down there with a paper plate of ham that went cold while I cut it into small pieces for a 4-year-old I had met twice. Upstairs I could hear the good silverware and my father telling the story about the ice storm in '92, which he tells every year and which is actually funny. At some point the noise changed and everybody moved into the front hall, and I heard my mother counting people, and I understood that they were taking the picture. They took it on the stairs, everyone in their sweaters. My mother had bought matching ones for the little ones that year, so it was a whole production. Nobody came down to get me. That photograph went on their Christmas card the next December. 50-something copies, mailed all over Kansas and Missouri and to my father's cousin in Oregon. 11 people on those stairs. I have one of those cards in a drawer because my mother mailed me one, the same as everybody else on the list. I did not say anything about it. I want to be honest about that too, because it matters later. Nobody hid me. I was 40 feet away with the door open. I did not go up, and they did not come down. And both of those facts are true. And for a long time I only counted the first one. March was the one that should have told me. Mary Beth called on a Tuesday and said she needed 1 hour urgent. Grant had something and she was stuck. I moved a customer walk-through, which is a thing my supervisor noticed, and drove 25 minutes across town in the rain. Grant was at work. I found that out later from Grant. He had not had anything at all. Mary Beth came down the stairs with her hair done, told me she would be back by 4, and said, over her shoulder, on her way out the door, that she just needed a couple hours where nobody wanted anything from her. She was gone until 6. I saw the lunch on her social media that night. 3 women at a table by a window, before she had even texted me a thank you. When I brought it up 2 days later, she said I was keeping score, and then she said the thing she always says, which is that I do not have anybody depending on me. So an afternoon is an afternoon. July was the barbecue. My parents invited me. I had a bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other, and my father said, "Oh good, you can watch the pool," before I got to the patio table. I watched the pool for 5 hours. I ate standing up. October was my mother volunteering me for the bake table at the parish Christmas bazaar. She did not tell me. I found out when the volunteer coordinator emailed me a shift assignment with my name on it and thanked me for stepping up again. That word again did something to me that I could not explain at the time. Again meant there was a record of me somewhere that I had never seen. And in between all of that, 2 small moments I did not think about for 1 second until much later. The first was my Uncle Terry. He came by my parents' house in September to move an outlet in the garage. My father had the folding tables out for something, and I was carrying them 2 at a time from the shed while my father held the ladder for Terry, and Colin sat on the steps with his phone. Terry watched me go past twice. Then he said, "Not to my father, to me. Why is it always you?" I said something like, "I do not mind. It is quicker if I do it." Which is the exact sentence that has cost me more of my life than any other sentence. He grunted, and he did not say anything else. And he left before dinner. Terry always left before dinner. I assumed he was rude. It did not occur to me until a year later that a man who will not stay for dinner at his own brother's house might have a reason. The second moment was my Aunt Roseanne, on the back step, at that same September thing. She came late, the way she always did, straight from a shift, still in her work polo. She brought a tin of the almond cookies she makes, the hard ones you have to dunk. She did not go inside. She sat down on the back step next to me while I was catching my breath, and she handed me one, and she said, "You doing okay, honey?" I remember it because it was so out of place. Everybody in that yard had asked me to do something that afternoon. She was the only person who asked me a question. I said I was fine. She looked at me for a second longer than she needed to, and then she said something I did not understand and did not think about again for 4 months. She said, "Yeah, that is what I say too." Then she went inside and took the plates off the table. That is the record. A Christmas card with 11 people on it. An afternoon in March, 5 hours by a pool. An email that said again. Every one of them was small enough to forgive on its own. That is how they were built. You cannot get angry about a pool, stacked up in order with the dates written down. They are not a list of favors. They are a shift schedule. Marisol Quintero and I met in 10th grade in a chemistry class where we were both bad at chemistry. She cleans teeth for a living now, at a practice off Shawnee Mission Parkway, and she is the only person I know who will ask me a hard question and then sit there in the silence without rescuing me from it. 3 weeks before all of this, she had called me about Hawaii. Her husband's family has a timeshare week in Kaanapali, on Maui, that rotates through the in-laws. This year it landed on Christmas week and it sleeps 8, and Marisol's sister-in-law had backed out in November because of a work thing. Marisol said, "There is a bed. You would owe us for the flight and a share of the fees. Come with us." I told her Christmas was complicated. That is the word I had been using for about 6 years. Complicated. It is a good word because it sounds like a fact, and it does not require anybody to ask a follow-up question. What it actually meant was that I did not have the standing to say no in my own family, and I did not want to explain that out loud to a friend who would then feel sorry for me. Sitting in the hardware store parking lot on the 18th, with my dates in front of me on a printed grid taped to a refrigerator, it stopped being complicated. She picked up on the second ring and said my name like a question. I asked if the bed was still open. She did not squeal. She did not tell me I deserved it. What she said was, "It is open, but the flights are going to hurt this late." And then she said, "Are you going to tell them?" I sat there with the phone against my ear and looked out at the empty lot, and I said, "They did not tell me." Marisol let that sit for a second. Then she said, "Okay," and she started reading me numbers. There is no non-stop out of Kansas City to Maui. There never has been. You go through Los Angeles or Phoenix or Denver, and in the last week before Christmas you go through whichever one still has a seat. The fare, I found, leaving Kansas City International at 11:40 on the morning of the 24th and connecting in Los Angeles, was $1,140 round trip. My share of the condo, split 6 ways, was $710, and the fees were due in full at booking. I read the terms twice because I am the person who reads the terms. Holiday weeks require payment up front. The deposit is not refundable. I want you to remember that line, because I did not know yet that it was the whole story. I sat there looking at the words "not refundable," and I thought about how much of my adult life had been spent absorbing other people's cancellations for free. $1,850. That was the number. Roughly 2.5 times what I had lost on a class I never finished, and roughly 2/3 of a number I had not heard yet. I hit confirm. My hands were shaking and I did not entirely understand why, because nothing dangerous was happening. Nobody was going to be hurt. A woman had bought an airplane ticket. Then I did what I always do, which is the thing my job has made automatic. I screenshotted the confirmation page. I forwarded the email to a folder. I put the departure time in my calendar with a reminder the night before. And I put the condo balance in the same calendar as a paid item with the date. That is not paranoia. That is dispatch. When a thing exists in writing with a timestamp, nobody gets to tell you later that it did not happen. Marisol asked again, on the phone. While I was doing it, she said, "Seriously, are you going to tell them?" And I sat there in the dark and I thought about the sequence of what had happened that afternoon. My mother had already moved furniture into the basement for me. My father had already saved himself the money. Mary Beth had already told the Lindstroms and Aunt Peg and the whole 8 o'clock congregation that childcare was handled. 3 adults had spent weeks making plans that ran through me, and not one of them had picked up a phone. I said, "They had 4 weeks to ask me. I am going to give them exactly the same courtesy they gave me." Marisol said, "That is going to be a very loud Christmas." I said I knew. Here's the part I am not proud of and am not going to leave out. I felt sick, not triumphant. Sick, the way you feel when you have broken something in someone else's house. I drove home with the radio off, and I kept running the conversation I could still have, the reasonable one, where I called my mother and explained and gave them 6 days to hire somebody. The reason I did not make that call is not that I was brave. It is that I recognized the feeling underneath the guilt. It was relief. It was the specific physical relief of putting down a thing you have been carrying so long that your arms had stopped reporting it. And I knew that if I made the reasonable call, I would end up in a negotiation. I would start at no, and I would end at 8 hours instead of 22. And I would call that a win. And I would spend Christmas in a basement, feeling like I had gotten away with something. I have negotiated my own life down that way for 17 years. I did not want to do it again. At home, I opened my work calendar. I had 3 floating days left over from the year, the ones you lose if you do not take them by the 31st. I had been holding them since August. For family. I typed in the request, hit send, and went to find my suitcase. For the next 3 days, the family group chat turned into a written confession that nobody knew they were writing. Friday morning. Mary Beth posted the grid as an image, the same one from the refrigerator, photographed slightly crooked, with a thumb in the corner of the frame. 22 people in that chat, counting the cousins and the 2 aunts and my father's friend Ron, who has been in it since a fishing trip in 2019 and has never once left. I read it on my break, standing in the parts room with a coffee going cold in my other hand. Friday, arrivals from 3 o'clock. Saturday, the 24th, brunch at 10, photographs at 4 while the light is still good, hotel dinner at 6:30, Sunday the 25th, exchange at 9, big meal at 2, and underneath, in a lighter color so it would not clutter the main blocks, the coverage, Bridget downstairs from 5, Bridget, dinner and bedtime Saturday, Bridget with kids 9 to 12 Sunday, adults resting. My mother replied with 3 hearts. My father wrote, "That is a real savings." Thank you, Mary Beth. I read that one about 6 times. He was thanking my sister for the money my labor was going to save him, not thanking me. Thanking the person who had arranged for me. Aunt Peg, who is my mother's older sister and who means well, and who has never in her life been able to tell when a room has gone quiet, asked whether Bridget wanted the upstairs guest room since it would be a long weekend. Mary Beth answered before I could have, even if I had been trying. She wrote, "She will not care. She never sleeps at holidays anyway." That is the sentence. Out of everything. The schedule, the money, the whole thing. That is the sentence that almost made me pick up the phone. She never sleeps at holidays anyway. Delivered as a fact about me, in front of 22 people, by someone who had never once asked me how I slept. I put the phone in my back pocket and I went and did a route change for a technician in Gardner. And my hands were fine and my voice was fine, and I did not answer. Saturday. My mother posted a photo of the basement. 2 folding beds, made up with the quilts from the cedar chest, the ones her mother made. She wrote, "Already down here?" Sunday afternoon. Mary Beth posted that she had called Little Bear and canceled, since we are covered. Little Bear is an agency in Overland Park. Everybody around here uses them. They book out in October for Christmas week and they do not hold spots. I sat with that one for a while. There had been a booking, made in the fall, when a person actually plans things. And now it was gone. And the reason it was gone was a decision made about me in a kitchen, 4 days before, by people who had not spoken to me. Then something happened in that chat that I did not think about at all until January. My Aunt Roseanne wrote one line. She wrote, "Anybody need me to grab your grandma's mail this week? I am going by Thursday like always." Nobody answered her. Not one person. My mother posted about the folding beds 9 minutes later. Aunt Peg asked what to bring for the salad. Ron sent a snowman. Roseanne's message sat there in the middle of all of it, and the chat scrolled right over the top of it, and I scrolled over it too. I want to be very clear about that, because I have thought about it a great deal since. I read it. I scrolled past it. I was busy documenting my own case. Something else went unmentioned that whole weekend, and I noticed it the way you notice a light that is burned out in a room you rarely use. Nobody said one word about how my grandmother was getting to Christmas. Not who was driving to Olathe, not what time. Her name did not come up in a chat about a family holiday, and it did not come up on the grid either. And 22 people, including me, did not find that strange. Here is what I learned in those 3 days, and it is the single most useful thing this whole mess taught me. When I stopped pushing back, they got honest. Every other year, I would have replied to that grid within 4 minutes. I would have written something careful, something that started with, "Of course I want to help," but... And then we would have negotiated. 22 hours would have become 14, and 14 would have become 10 with a break, and I would have felt like I had won something, and the shape of the arrangement would never have changed at all. Silence is uncomfortable. Silence is also a very good instrument. With nobody to argue with, my family kept explaining themselves, and every explanation went further than the last one. That is a real savings. She will not care. We are covered. I screenshotted every message, not because I had a plan. I did not have a plan. I had a booking and a suitcase and a growing sense that I was going to need to be able to prove, later, that this had happened exactly the way it happened. Anybody who has ever been the reliable one in a family knows why. When you finally step out of the box, the story changes fast, and it does not change in your favor. Within a week, you will be told that you overreacted to something nobody ever said. So I built a folder, screenshots, dates, the confirmation from the airline, the receipt from the condo. On Sunday night, I laid out my clothes for the week and put my suitcase against the wall by the door. And I did not answer the chat. 22 people, and not one of them typed a question mark. Monday night, I took all 7 gifts out of the big canvas bag I use every year and repacked them into shipping boxes. I had bought them in November, the way I always do, because I like buying them. A dinosaur book with fold-out pages, a soccer ball, fat markers that do not bleed through paper, 2 art kits, a puzzle of the solar system, a stuffed otter I stood in an aisle debating for longer than a grown woman should. I taped up the boxes, wrote my parents' address on all of them, and paid for delivery by the 23rd at the counter on Tuesday morning. $61 in shipping to send presents 4 miles. I want to explain why I spent $61 I did not have to spend. Because I knew exactly what was coming. I knew that within about a day of them figuring out where I was, Somebody in that family was going to say that I had wrecked Christmas for the kids. It is the oldest move there is. You cannot defend a boundary against a child. So the child gets put in front of the argument like a shield. I was not refusing children. I was refusing 3 adults who had arranged their own rest by spending my 3 days. So the presents went ahead of me. With cards. In my handwriting. With no explanation of anything. If they wanted to tell the little ones a story about where I was, they would have to make it up themselves, and they would have to do it standing next to a pile of boxes I had paid to send. My father called Tuesday evening while I was writing out the cards. He did not ask what time I was arriving. He did not ask how work was. He said, "Does your car have room for 2 more booster seats? Because Mary Beth is short on space coming over on Friday." I said I was in the middle of something and I would call him back. He made the sound he makes. Then he said, "This is exactly why we send out a schedule. Bridget, everybody has to cooperate." I got off the phone and I sat there with a pen in my hand and I thought about that word for a while. Cooperate. My father used it perfectly sincerely. He believed it. In his head there was a plan, and there were people who cooperated with the plan, and there were people who made things difficult, and those were the only 2 categories available. Cooperation requires 2 people who both agreed to something. What he was describing was compliance with a bow on it. That same night, Colin posted in the chat, "My brother is 25. He works in a parts warehouse for a distributor on the other side of the state line, which is a job I helped him get. He asked whether we were doing the gag gift exchange again this year and said he had a good one lined up. Nobody assigned Colin anything. Not one block on that entire grid had his name in it. He was not asked to pick anybody up, drive anybody home, carry anything, or watch anybody. And here is what got me. In 28 years, I had never once resented him for it. I had built an entire private explanation. Colin is younger. Colin is a guy. And guys in our family do not get handed the little ones. Colin would only be in the way. Every one of those was something I made up, so I would not have to notice the pattern. It is remarkable what a person will build to avoid seeing one simple thing. The simple thing was this. My family had 2 categories. The way my father had 2 categories. There were people whose time you asked for, and there was me, Wednesday evening, the 23rd. My mother left a voicemail while I was in the shower. I still have it. I have listened to it more times than is healthy. She said, "Hi, honey," in the warm voice. She said traffic on Friday would be terrible, so I should come by 10 in the morning. She said the Lindstroms were coming at 3. So, and here I am quoting her exactly, "Wear something presentable when people are arriving, and then you can change into whatever is comfortable once you take the kids downstairs." That is the whole voicemail. 22 seconds. She meant it kindly. She was being helpful. In her mind, she was saving me from standing in a nice room in the wrong clothes. Presentable upstairs. Comfortable downstairs. There it was, the entire arrangement, in 11 words, from a woman who would have told you with total sincerity that she treated all 3 of her children the same. I sat on the edge of my bed with wet hair and listened to it twice, and then I saved it. And then I did something I had not planned to do. I moved it into the same folder as the screenshots and the airline confirmation. I did not think of it as evidence yet. I thought of it as something I did not want to lose track of. That is dispatch again. Save the ticket. Then I went into my settings and shut off location sharing. Not because anyone was tracking me, but because my mother has the app and checks it. And I did not want a map to be the thing that told her. I scheduled a car for 8 in the morning and put my suitcase against the door, on top of my work bag, so I could not leave without both. And then I stood in the middle of my apartment with the lights off, looking at a Christmas tree in the window of the building across the street. And I let myself feel the thing I had been refusing to feel since Thursday. I was going to hurt them. Not much, and not permanently, and not more than they had earned. But I was going to hurt them, and I was going to do it on Christmas, and no amount of arithmetic was going to make that fact feel clean. I went to bed anyway. I did not stay there. Around 1 a.m, I got up for water and remembered that my portable charger was in the junk drawer in the kitchen, and I turned on the light over the stove and opened the drawer and started digging through it. Batteries, a tape measure, 2 dead pens. The manual for a coffee maker I no longer own. And, folded in half at the back, my parents' Christmas card from the year before. You know the kind. Glossy, 5x7, a border of pine branches printed along the edge, and the photograph filling the middle. 11 people on the stairs at my parents' house, everybody in sweaters. My mother in the center with her hand on the banister. I stood there in my kitchen at 1 a.m. holding it, and I counted the people, which I had never let myself do before. Then I put it back in the drawer, because there was no use in it. And I found the charger, and I was halfway to my bedroom when I stopped in the hallway. I had been thinking about a card. That was the thing snagging in me. Not that one. A different one. The Christmas before. I had sent my grandmother a card. I remember buying it at the drugstore on Antioch because it had a cardinal on the front and she keeps a feeder on her balcony railing that she is not technically allowed to have. I remember writing in it. I remember that I wrote more than you usually write in a Christmas card. 4 or 5 sentences. About work and about the fact that I was thinking of taking a class again. She never wrote back. She never wrote back the year before that, either. And I had sent one then, too. And the summer before that I had mailed her an actual letter. 2 pages. After a bad week, because writing to her was a thing I had done since I was 9 years old, and it was the only way I knew how to say certain things. Nothing. Here is what you have to understand about my grandmother. Delphine Kaufman worked as a secretary at an insurance office in Kansas City for 31 years, and she writes to everybody. She wrote to her brother in Wichita every month of his life. She wrote to the woman who cut her hair for 20 years after that woman moved to Arizona. When I was in college, she sent me a letter for my birthday every single year, on the same lined paper, with a $2 bill folded inside. And she did it whether or not I had written back. The last one of those came when I was 24. I stood in that hallway and I did the thing I had been doing all week, which was line events up in order and look for the shape. 4 years of nothing from a woman who wrote to her hairdresser. And what I concluded, standing there at 1 a.m. with a charger in my hand, was that my grandmother was getting old. That is what I concluded, that she was 79 and tired and her hands were probably not what they were, and that letters get harder, and that this is what happens, and that I should call her more. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 1:17 in the morning. I thought, I will call her when I get back. First thing. I will drive out to Alada the week after Christmas and sit in her apartment and let her feed me those hard almond cookies. Then I went to bed. I want to stop for 1 second and say the quiet thing, because it is the only way the rest of this makes sense. If I had picked up the phone that night, or any of the 400 nights before it, one question would have come out of it. Just one. And 4 years would have come apart right there, on the phone, in December, before I ever got on an airplane. I did not make the call. It was late. She goes to bed at 9. I was leaving in 7 hours. Those are all true, and none of them are the reason. The reason is that I had a story that explained everything without requiring anything from me. She is old. That was the story. It was tidy and it was sad in an acceptable way, and it let me off. We do that. We take the version that costs us the least and we file it and we stop looking. Marisol had texted me around 11 that night to confirm where we were meeting at the airport. When I said I would be at the South Curb by 9, she came back with something else. She wrote, "Are you scared they are going to be mad?" I said yes. I typed it fast, because it was true and because it embarrassed me. She typed for a while. Then it stopped. Then it started again. What she finally sent was this: "If they are mad, does that mean you did something wrong?" I looked at that for a long time in the dark, with the phone lighting up my face, and I did not answer it, and she did not ask again. I lay there and turned it over, because the honest answer was that in my family, anger had always functioned as proof. If my mother was upset with me, then something had gone wrong, and since nothing had gone wrong with her, the something must have been me. That equation had never once been written down, and I had never once questioned it. And I was 28 years old. I fell asleep somewhere after 3, and the last thing I remember thinking was not whether they would be angry. I already knew they would be angry. What I wanted to know was what they would say once I was not there to make it convenient. My mother called twice before my alarm went off. The first voicemail was practical. The interstate would be a mess. Leave early. Do not take 75. The second one, 11 minutes later, was sharper. Mary Beth had moved her hair appointment up and needed me at the house by 9:30. I listened to both of them with my toothbrush in my mouth. The car came at 8. It was that flat Kansas gray where the sky and the parking lots are the same color, old snow shoved against the curbs with gravel frozen into it. Somewhere on Interstate 35, the driver caught my eye in the mirror and asked if I was heading home for Christmas. I looked at the destination on his screen, Kansas City International, Terminal B. I said something like that. By 7:30, the chat had already started, and it kept going the whole drive. My father wanted to know who had moved the folding beds against the wall. Mary Beth said one of the kids had gotten into a wrapped box. My mother tagged me and wrote, "Bridget, please respond. We need to coordinate." I did not respond, because there was nothing to coordinate. Coordinating is what happens before. What was happening now was a shift briefing. Marisol was waiting for me at the South Curb in a red coat with a suitcase that had a broken wheel. She hugged me, and she looked at my phone going off in my hand, and she said, "Do you want me to hold that until they call our group?" I said, "No. I want to be exact about why, because that decision shaped everything that came after. If I had turned my phone off at 8:40 and surfaced 12 hours later in Hawaii, my family would have spent that whole day writing the story without me in it. Bridget disappeared. Bridget left us stranded with no warning. I needed them to hear it from me. Once, clearly, on the record, that the emergency they were about to have was not something I had done to them. It was the bill coming due on something they had assumed. We got through security at 9. We found our gate. Marisol went to get coffee. At 9:15, Mary Beth called. She did not say hello. She said, "I have to be out the door in 15 minutes. Where are you?" I said, "I am at the airport." She went quiet for a second. Then she made a small laughing sound and said, "Okay. Cute? Whose flight are you getting? Is it Aunt Peg?" I said, "No. I am flying to Maui." I heard her stop walking. Then it came out all at once, loud enough that a man 2 seats down looked up, that I was abandoning the family, that I was blowing up a plan 7 people had built, that I was acting like a teenager and everybody had been counting on me. I let her get all the way to the end. You do not interrupt an angry customer, because the thing you need is usually in the last sentence. When she stopped for breath, I asked her one question. I said, "When did I agree? And who did I agree with?" She said, "Everybody knows you always do it." I said, "Doing something twice is not the same as promising to do it forever." And that is when she said it. She dropped her voice, the way she does when she is about to be reasonable at you. And she said, "You do not have anybody waiting at home. Bridget, what exactly do you have to miss?" There it was, out loud, the thing that had been running underneath all 4 of those years. My hours had no price, because nobody else had already claimed them. I did not raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice at my sister, and I did not start at a departure gate. I said, "If my time is worth nothing, then Little Bear should be cheap this morning. Go ahead and call them." Silence. Then she said I was cruel, and she said she was telling Mom. I said, "You will not have to. She is on the other line." I hung up on my sister and picked up my mother. She did not say hello either. She said, "Why are you not here? The whole house is waiting on you." Behind her, I could hear it. 2 women talking over each other, a chair going over, somebody shouting up a staircase about shoes. My father's voice from a long way off saying that the Lindstroms were already parking. I looked through the window at the plane. A man in an orange vest was walking backward along the wing with his arms up. It was very quiet where I stood. I said, "Do not wait on me. Go ahead and eat without me. I am going to be watching the surf." For about 1 full second, my mother did not make any sound at all. Then it broke behind her. I could hear Mary Beth's voice come up out of nowhere saying that I had done this on purpose, that I had planned it. I could hear my father asking whether a hotel would refund 6 covers on Christmas Eve. Something metal hit a floor. My mother snapped at all of them to be quiet, and then came back to the phone with her voice dropped low and flat, which in my family is much worse than shouting. She said, "We were depending on you." I said, "You were depending on an agreement that does not exist." She said, "We are your family." I said, "Families ask." Then my father took the phone. He told me to change my flight. He said he would cover the difference. He said, "If you get on that plane, this family is not going to forget it." I said, "Good. Write it down. Put it on the schedule." He called me disrespectful. And then he said the sentence I would still be carrying around a month later, when it finally cracked in half in a different room, in front of his mother. He said, "We do not send each other invoices in this family. We had an hour and 40 minutes on the ground in Los Angeles." I turned my phone on, and it buzzed for a solid 20 seconds. In 28 years, I had never seen my parents and my sister argue with each other in public. They were doing it in front of 22 people. My mother wrote that Mary Beth had assured everyone months ago that child care was handled, and that she had planned around it in good faith. Mary Beth wrote back inside of 2 minutes, Mom was the one who said in that kitchen that Bridget could not possibly have anything better going on. Neither of them deleted anything fast enough. Then the questions started coming from the cousins, and they were all the same question, and nobody could answer it. Who asked her? When? Show us where she said yes. My father wrote that this was a private family matter. My cousin Nadine, who had said maybe 9 words in that chat in 3 years, wrote back, "We are the family, Uncle Al." And then my Uncle Terry, who almost never posts anything, wrote 1 line. He wrote, "If you put a man's name in a box he did not sign. That is not a plan. That is a work order. He is an electrician. That is how the trade talks." Little Bear was full, obviously. Everybody who books childcare for the 24th books it in October, which is exactly when my sister booked it and then unbooked it. My father found an emergency service out of Kansas City that would send people same day. $32 an hour per child. 6-hour minimum. Same-day booking fee. Holiday premium on top of the base rate, and a travel surcharge because of the distance. $2,865 for 2 providers. He paid it with a card over the phone at 2 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and then he posted in the chat that Christmas was becoming financially absurd. I read that from a plastic chair at a gate in Los Angeles, and felt nothing at all. It was like watching a customer discover the after-hours rate. Then Grant went looking for a receipt. He was not investigating anybody. He wanted to split the agency bill with my parents and needed to know what the original booking had cost. So he went into the shared email account he and Mary Beth use for household things and searched Little Bear. He found the confirmation from October, and directly under it, he found the cancellation dated the 3rd of December. I need you to hold that date next to the other one. My sister canceled paid childcare on the 3rd of December. I found out that my holiday had been assigned to me on the 18th. 15 days apart. She did not cancel because she thought I had said yes. She canceled 15 days before anybody in that house said one word to me about any of it. And the reason was one line further down her inbox. Same afternoon, 90 minutes later, a receipt from a salon and spa on 119th Street. $410, paid in full. Little Bear takes a deposit at booking. Non-refundable after 30 days. Refundable before. She had gotten out of it on day 28, and she had spent the money the same afternoon. Grant did not ask her about it privately. He asked her in the chat, in front of everybody. I think he had been carrying his own version of this for years and had run out of room. He wrote, "Why did you cancel Little Bear on December 3rd? Mary Beth wrote, "We are not doing this here." Grant wrote, "You put her name on a schedule in front of 22 people. The invoice can go in the same place." That was the moment the chat went quiet. We landed at Kahului a little after 4, local time. The air came in warm and heavy and smelled like rain on asphalt. I did not feel like I had won anything. What I felt was exposed, raw, and watchful, like someone who has stolen something. Twice on the drive, I caught myself checking my phone, waiting for a message telling me the trip was off because the family needed me. Marisol pulled off at a lunch counter outside town, a walk-up window with 6 picnic tables and a hand-painted board of what they had left. Grilled chicken, 2 scoops of rice, macaroni salad in a paper carton. I sat there with the carton on my knees and my phone face down on the table next to me, and it buzzed twice, and I turned it over. Marisol did not say anything for a minute. Then she said, "How long are you planning to hold on to that thing?" I said I did not know what she meant. She said, "You are 4,000 miles away, and you are still on shift." That landed harder than anything my family had said to me all day. I have not turned my phone off at night since I was 19, not silent. Off. I am on call for a heating company, and I have been the person everyone reaches for since I was 11. And somewhere in there, the thing stopped being a phone and became a leash I paid for myself. I held down the button. The screen asked me if I was sure. I slid it across. The screen went black, and I put it in the bottom of my bag under a towel, and I picked my fork back up. It stayed off for 26 hours. Standing at that lunch counter, I had the rest of this story completely wrong. I thought the worst thing I would ever learn about my family was what my sister did with a deposit. I thought the ugliest number in this story was $2,865. 26 hours later, on Christmas evening, I turned my phone back on at a kitchen counter in Kaanapali, and the message that stopped me was not from my mother. It was from someone I had spoken to maybe 3 times in my life. It was not about Christmas at all. It was about last year. Christmas Day in Kanapali was the best day I had had in about 6 years. And I am going to come back to it, because it deserves more than a sentence. But first I have to tell you about 7:15 that evening. Everybody else had gone down to the water to watch the sun go. I stayed back to start dinner, which I had volunteered for, which is a distinction I did not appreciate until I said the word out loud in my own head. Volunteered. I had put my own name in a box. I had the rice on and the counter wiped down and a beer sweating next to the cutting board. And my bag was on the chair by the door with the towel still over it. I got the phone out and held the button. 43 messages. I let them load and I scrolled with my thumb the way you scroll past a car wreck, fast, catching one word in 10. Selfish. Deliberate. 2,800. Somebody had left the chat and come back. My mother had written a paragraph and deleted it, and the ghost of it was still there in the thread as a message removed. I was going to put the phone face down and go back to the rice. Then I saw the separate thread, and it was from Nadine Petty. Nadine is my cousin. Her mother is my Aunt Roseanne. She is 29. She works at a veterinary clinic in Lenexa, and if you had asked me that morning to count the conversations I had ever had with her, I could have done it on one hand and had fingers left over. Her message said this: I know today is a mess, and I am sorry to add to it. But I have to ask you something, and I have been sitting on it for a year. Last winter, did you tell Grandma Dell you were too busy to come to her birthday? I read it 3 times. Then I put the beer down because my hands had gone strange, and I read it a 4th time. My grandmother turned 79 in February. I did not go to a party for her birthday. I did not go to a party for her birthday because I did not know there was one. I typed back, and I made myself keep it flat, because I did not want to load the question before I had the answer. I wrote, I was never invited to that. I did not know it happened. Where did you hear that I said I was too busy? Then I stood in that kitchen with the rice going and I watched the little dots come and go twice and then nothing. 4 hours, nothing. I want you to understand the shape of what was happening in me during those 4 hours, because it was not anger. Anger would have been simpler. What I felt was a kind of vertigo. Everything up to that point had been about one weekend. It had a beginning on the 18th of December, and it had a bill attached to it, and it had a person, my sister, whose name was on the cancellation. It was ugly, but it was an event. Events end. Nadine's question had no edges on it at all. It reached backward past Christmas, past the schedule, into a room I had not been in, on a day I had not known about, where somebody had said something about me in my absence. And it had a date, February, 11 months earlier. Whatever this was, it had been running a lot longer than a week, and I had been living inside it the entire time without noticing. The way you do not hear a refrigerator until it shuts off. The others came up from the beach, loud and sandy and happy, and I made dinner and I laughed at the right places, and Marisol looked at me twice across the table but did not ask in front of everybody, which is one of about 400 reasons she is my friend. At 11:15, Nadine answered. She wrote, I heard it from your mom. She said it at the table, in front of everybody, when somebody asked where you were. And I believed her. Bridget, I want you to know I believed her. And I said something about it to my mom afterward that I feel bad about now. Then, a minute later, one more line. You should talk to Uncle Terry. I sat out on the lanai for a while after that. It was warm, and there were geckos on the wall, and somebody 2 units down was playing a slack key record with all their doors open. Uncle Terry has not eaten a meal at my parents' house since 2019. I had known that fact my entire adult life the way you know that a certain aunt does not drive at night. It was furniture. It was just a thing about Terry. Nobody had ever told me why. I looked at his name in my contacts for a long time. It was 6:20 in the morning in Kansas, and it was the 26th of December, and there was no version of this that was polite. I called him anyway. He picked up on the second ring, and he did not say hello, and he did not sound like he had been asleep. He said, "I have been waiting 3 years for you to call me. I did not have anything ready for that." He said, "Hang on," and I heard a door, and then a truck door, and then the sound of a heater fan coming up loud and getting turned down, and I realized he had gotten out of his own house to have this conversation and gone and sat in his van in his own driveway in December in Kansas. Then he said, "All right. Ask me." I asked him about February. He said, "Your grandma's 79th. Roseanne had it at her house because Dell's building will not let you have more than 6 people in the common room without paying. There were maybe 14 of us. Cake from the grocery store. The kind with the shortening frosting your grandma likes." I said, "I did not know about it." He said, "I know you did not, because about halfway through, my brother's wife told the whole table that you could not make it because you were swamped right now." Swamped. My mother does not use that word about herself. She uses it about other people, and she uses it kindly, in a tone that makes the other person sound impressive and unavailable at the same time. I said, "Was that the only time?" And my Uncle Terry, sitting in a cold van in his driveway at 6:30 in the morning, went through it like a man reading off a work order. Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Somebody asked where I was, and my mother said I was working, and that I had gotten hard to pin down since I took on more at the company. I was not working. I had not been invited to that either. I had eaten a sandwich at my apartment and watched the parade on my laptop, the funeral, in the spring, for the husband of my grandmother's friend Arlene, who used to bring me licorice when I was small. Terry said my mother told 2 different people I do not really do that kind of thing. He said it stuck with him because that is a strange thing to say about a woman in her 20s, as if I had a policy about funerals. And then the parish bazaar in December. My mother told the woman running the raffle that I could not commit to the committee because of my work schedule. I was at that bazaar. I stood behind the bake table for 5 hours in a church basement selling my mother's anise cookies, because my mother had signed me up for the shift without telling me, and I found out from an email that thanked me for stepping up again. I said that out loud to Terry, that I had been in the building. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "That is the one that got me too." I asked him if he thought she was lying. He took a while with that. Terry is careful about words in the way tradesmen are careful about words, because in his job, a wrong word costs somebody a service call. He said, "Here is how I look at it. If a guy is making something up, it comes out a little different every time. He adds to it, he gets fancy. But if it comes out word for word the same way in 4 different rooms over 2 years, that is not a story he is inventing. That is a thing he believes." He said, "Your mother is not sitting up at night thinking of ways to make you look bad. Your mother has an explanation for you that she is very comfortable with, and she has said it so many times that it has worn a groove." I sat on that lanai with the phone hot against my ear, and I felt something rearrange itself. For 4 years I had been telling myself a story about being taken for granted, being overlooked, being the easy one. All of those are passive. All of those are things that happen because nobody is paying attention. This was not that. This was active. Every time I was not in a room, a sentence about me was going into it. And here's the part that made me put my hand over my mouth on a warm night 4,000 miles from Kansas. The sentence was true. I was busy. I was swamped. I was hard to pin down. I was those things because I was in a church basement selling cookies my mother had volunteered me to sell, or at my sister's house watching children so she could have lunch, or in a car on Interstate 35 because somebody's water heater had let go. They filled my calendar. Then they explained my absence to other people using the calendar they had filled. There is no word for that in my family. There is a word for it on a job site. When a contractor keeps a crew so buried in change orders that they miss a deadline, and then tells the client the crew is unreliable, we do not call that a misunderstanding. I asked Terry the question I should have asked him 3 years earlier. I said, "Why did you never tell me?" He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice had changed, and it was the only time in the whole conversation that he sounded like something hurt. He said, "Because you never asked anybody anything, kiddo. You showed up, you did the job, and you went home. Every single time. I would see you carrying tables in the dark, and I would think, she is going to say something this year. And you never did. And after a while I figured that was your business. And a man who has already stepped out of that family does not get to come back in and tell somebody else how to live." I said, "What do you mean stepped out?" And Terry said, "That is a longer story, and it is 6:30 in the morning, and I have a panel change in Shawnee at 8. Ask me when you are home. Buy me breakfast." Then he said one more thing before he hung up, and I did not think much of it at the time. He said, "Your grandma asked about you at that party. Twice. I spent most of the 26th on a lanai in Hawaii, making phone calls to people in Kansas, which is not what anybody means when they say they are going to Maui. I want to be honest about how that felt, because from the outside it probably looks efficient. It was not efficient. Every one of those calls required me to ask another human being what version of me they had been handed, and then stand there while they told me I called Yolanda Prieto first. She and her husband lived 2 doors down from my parents on Delmar Street for 19 years before they moved out to a patio home near the golf course. She used to give me tomatoes. She answered on the first ring, delighted, and asked about my job before I could get a word in. I told her I was trying to sort out a family misunderstanding, and I asked her something strange. I asked whether, over the last few years, my mother had ever said anything to her about me. She got quiet. Then she said, "Well, honey, do not take this the wrong way. 2 years ago, Mrs. Prieto's daughter had gone through a divorce, and Mrs. Prieto had thought of me because I had helped her once with the insurance form, and she thought I was sensible. She said she was going to call me and ask if I would talk to her daughter, and she said my mother told her, in the driveway, that I did not love being bothered. She said, I did not think anything of it at the time. I thought, well, she is young, she has her own life. She said it very sweetly. Bridget. I said I knew she did. That is the whole point. My mother says everything sweetly. The second call was Dwayne Kohler, who runs the raffle and half of everything else at St. Bede's. He is about 60, and he talks for a long time, and I have known him since I was confirmed. He remembered the sign-up immediately. He had wanted me on the bazaar committee, not the bake table, the committee, because, and this is a direct quote, "You keep a calendar better than anybody in this parish, and we are all just guessing." He printed a form. He gave it to my mother after the 8 o'clock, because she said she would pass it along and save him a stamp. He never got it back. He said he figured I was not interested and he did not want to pester me, and then he apologized to me, on the phone, for not pestering me. I sat there afterward and thought about the fact that a 60-year-old man had spent 2 years quietly believing I did not want to be part of something. while I stood in his basement selling cookies. The third call was Nadine, and it was the hardest one, because Nadine was the only person who apologized without being asked. She told me she had believed it. All of it. She said she had a whole picture of me in her head, and the picture was of a cousin who had gotten a little above the family, who was polite at holidays and could not really be counted on, and who did not call her own grandmother. She said, "And then in July I came back for my mom's casserole dish, because we had left it at your parents' after the cookout, and it was almost 10 at night, and everybody was inside. She said, you were in the backyard by yourself folding up the chairs. She said, and earlier that same day I heard your mom tell the Lindstroms that you had only stopped by for a minute because you had somewhere to be. Then she said, that was the first time I thought, none of this adds up." I asked her why she had not said anything to me then, in July. And she said the thing that I think is the truest sentence anybody said to me in this entire story. She said, because it was not my family to fix. And because I did not think you would believe me over your own mother, she was right. In July, I would not have. That night I did something I am not proud of. At 2 a.m, Kansas time, which is 8 p.m. where I sat on the end of the bed and wrote my mother a text message that was 3 paragraphs long. It had the word liar in it. It had Yolanda Prieto's name in it. It had a sentence about the Christmas card photograph that I am not going to repeat, because it was the meanest thing I have ever written to anybody. I read it twice. My thumb was over the arrow. Then I deleted it, and I sat there with my heart going like I had run up a flight of stairs, and I felt sick with myself. Not because it was untrue, because if I had sent it at 2 a.m. from a beach, every single thing in it would have become evidence that I was unstable, and the 4 years would have been swallowed whole by one text. I know exactly how that works. I have watched it work. So instead I opened a blank note on my phone and I started a list. February, grandmother's 79th, at Roseanne's. Source, Terry. Quote, swamped right now. Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Source, Terry. Quote, working, hard to pin down. Spring funeral. Source, Terry. Quote, does not really do that kind of thing. Parish bazaar. Source, Dwayne Kohler. Plus sign-up form never delivered. Driveway conversation about Mrs. Prieto's daughter. Source, Yolanda Prieto. Quote, does not love being bothered. July cookout. Source, Nadine Petty. Quote, only stopped by for a minute. 6 entries. Dates. Sources. And the words themselves. I was not building a case to punish anybody. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I was building it because I already knew, with total certainty, what would happen the first time I opened my mouth about any of this without paper in my hand. They would call it a misunderstanding. I said I would come back to Christmas Day, and I am going to, because if I only tell you the parts with the phone in them, then the people in this story who were awful get all of it. And that is not how it went. There were 7 of us in that condo. Marisol and her husband Eddie, Eddie's brother Ray and his wife Charmaine, a couple named the Ferrises who had been coming with them for years and who I had never met before that week. And in the second bedroom, on a mattress with a quilt that smelled like a closet. The coffee carafe had a cracked lid, so you had to hold it with a towel. Somebody, and nobody ever admitted who, had stuck a plastic branch off a fake wreath into a water glass on the counter and put 2 ornaments on it. That was the tree. Ray called it the tree with total sincerity for 4 days. Breakfast on Christmas morning was toast and eggs and a pineapple that Eddie cut so badly that Charmaine took the knife away from him. There was an argument about whether you salt pineapple. There is apparently a right answer, and I still do not know what it is. We walked to a small cove in the afternoon, maybe 20 minutes down the road, and I sat on a rock and let the water come up over my feet, and my legs got so cold I lost track of them. That night we played a card game whose rules the Ferrises had learned wrong from somebody else's family, and there was a 40-minute argument about whether you can go out on a wild card, and I laughed so hard at one point that I had to put my head down on the table, and at some point in the middle of all of that, I went out and sat on the edge of the lanai with my feet hanging off, and I listened to them in the kitchen behind me, 6 adults in a full house, on Christmas Day. And not one of them had given me a job. Nobody had handed me a list. Nobody had told me where to sit. When I got up to do the dishes, Charmaine took the plate out of my hand and said, "Sit down, you cooked." Which I had. I had cooked because I offered to cook. And offering had turned out to be a completely different physical experience from being volunteered. And I did not have a name for the difference until I was sitting there with my feet over the edge. I cried for about 90 seconds, quietly, facing the water, while a card game went on behind me. It was not sadness. I want to be precise about that. It was the feeling you get in your hands the day after you finally set down something heavy, when they will not stop shaking and you cannot explain to anybody why. Later, Marisol came out and sat next to me and did not comment on my face. She said her mother had called that morning and put the whole kitchen on speaker. Then she said something offhand that I have thought about 100 times since. She said, "At my mom's house, the little ones eat at the big table. Always have." She said, "I did not know until I got older that some families spend the whole holiday figuring out where to put them." I did not say anything to that. I thought about a basement with 2 folding beds in it, made up with my great-grandmother's quilts, and a hotel dinner for 6 adults booked in October, and I understood that my family had not been buying child care. They had been buying the right to be absent from their own children on Christmas Eve, and I had been the payment. After a while, Marisol asked what I was going to do when I got back. I said I did not know yet. I said I had 6 entries in a note on my phone, and a bill for $2,865 that was not mine. And I did not know what any of it added up to. And Marisol said the sentence that ended up being the reason I did what I did on the 31st. She said, "You keep acting like you have to prove your case before you are allowed to be upset." I said that was not true. And then I sat there and thought about it and told her it was completely true. Every single thing I had done since the 18th of December was documentation, screenshots, a saved voicemail, a note with sources and quotes. And underneath all of it was the assumption that my own experience of my own life would not count as evidence in my own family. I said that to her. Roughly. And Marisol nodded and said, "So, which one are you doing when you go home? Are you going to make them believe you? Or are you going to stop needing them to—" I said, "Can I do both?" She said, "No." That is the most useful thing anybody has ever said to me. I slept 9 hours that night, which I had not done since I was in school. The next morning, the 27th, I sat on the lanai with the cracked carafe, and I moved my return flight up by 1 day, to the 28th, not out of guilt. I want that on the record, because both my mother and my sister later described me as having come slinking home early, and one of them said it in front of other people. I moved it because I had stopped feeling the need to hide from that house, and because I had finally figured out what I was going to say. Kansas City in the last week of December is the exact opposite of Maui, in a way that feels personal. I walked out of the terminal at 9 at night into 14 degrees and a wind coming off the parking garage, and the snow along the curbs had that gray crust on it with gravel frozen in. I slept in my own bed and woke up at 6 out of habit. I did not drive to my parents' house. I drove to Olathe. My grandmother lives at a place called Cedar Ridge, which is independent living, which is the polite way of saying apartments for people who can still do everything but should not do all of it alone. There is a front desk with a woman named Pauline behind it, and a lobby that smells like carpet shampoo and coffee, and a bulletin board with the week's activities in 24-point type. She is in 112, ground floor, with a sliding door onto a slab of patio. There is a bird feeder hanging off the railing that she is not technically allowed to have. It has been there for 6 years. Pauline pretends not to see it. I knocked and I heard her coming, and it took a while. When she opened the door, her face did the thing that I do not have a good word for. It came apart and reassembled. She said my name twice. The apartment was the same. The recliner with the towel over the headrest, the good chair nobody sits in, a pill organizer on the table by the window, the long kind with 4 compartments a day, and every compartment squared up. She made me sit down, and she made coffee that was too strong, and she brought out the almond cookies, the hard ones, and she watched me eat one the way she has watched me eat things since I was 6. And then she said, "I am so glad you came out. Roseanne said you were swamped." I did not react. I want to tell you I caught it in the moment, but I did not. Not really. It went past me the way a word goes past you when you are busy being happy. We talked for 2 hours. She asked about my job. She asked if I was still at the furnace place, which is what she calls it and has always called it. She asked whether Kevin's daughter had come in from Denver, which I had mentioned to her a 1.5 years ago. Once. She told me about a woman on the 2nd floor who had started a fight over a jigsaw puzzle. She told me, with dates, about the ice storm in 1994, and who lost power for how long, and what my grandfather said about the utility company, which is a story I have heard 40 times and which she told the same way she always tells it. She asked about Arlene's boy in Topeka by name. Somewhere in the middle of that, she said, "Well, Mary Beth, hand me that." Then she stopped. She looked at the ceiling for a second. She said, Bridget, honey, hand me that." I felt the floor tilt. I want to be honest about what went through my head, because it is the thing that let everything else stay hidden for another 5 days. I thought, she is slipping. 79? That is how it starts. I made myself watch her for the next hour the way you watch a technician you are not sure about, and here is what I saw. She knew the day of the week. She knew what she had eaten. She knew the name of the woman with the puzzle and the make of my car. She caught a mistake I made about her own brother's age and corrected me. 1 wrong name in 2 hours. Out of a woman who raised 4 children whose names all start with the same letter sound. That is not slipping. That is being 79. Near the end, I asked her about the Christmas card. I asked it lightly. I said, "Did you get my card last year? The one with the cardinal on it. I thought of you because of your feeder." She put her cup down. She said, "No." Then she said, and she was not upset yet. She was puzzled, she said, "But I wrote to you, honey, twice last winter. Why did you never write back?" I said I had not gotten any letters. And here is where 2 people who love each other looked straight at the truth and did not see it, because we each had an explanation that cost us nothing. She said the post office out here is terrible now, and she went off about a package that took 3 weeks from Wichita, and she was so pleased to have a reason that I let her have it. And I thought, she means she wrote them in her head. Or she wrote them and never mailed them. Old people do that. My grandmother is 79 and she has letters in a drawer she never sent. And that is sad. And I will visit more. That is what I decided. I sat in her apartment and I decided that, and then I let it go. She said, well, I have got the drafts somewhere. I keep the drafts. I said, I know you do. Grandma, I did not ask to see them. When I got up to leave, she walked me to the door and she took hold of my hand with both of hers. And her hands were cold. They are always cold now. And she said, come back out next week. And I said, of course. I got about 4 steps down the hallway before I understood how she had said it. She had not said it the way you say a plan. She had said it the way you say a wish, to somebody you do not really expect to see again. I texted my mother on the 29th and said I would come by that evening on 2 conditions. Mary Beth and Grant had to be there, and nobody was going to interrupt me while I talked. She wrote back 1 word. Fine. I have never sent a message like that in my life. My hands were sweating when I hit send, which tells you something, because I negotiate with strangers about money 4 times a day. The folding beds were still up in the hallway, both of them, made, with the quilts on them. 5 days after Christmas. Nobody had put them away. I do not know if that was laziness or if it was staged. And I have decided it does not matter, because the effect was the same either way. You had to walk past them to get to the kitchen. The agency invoice was on the kitchen table, not in a drawer, not on the counter with the mail. Squared up in the middle of the table like an exhibit at a hearing. My mother's eyes were swollen and she had done something with makeup that made it worse. Mary Beth sat with her arms crossed and her coat still on. Grant sat a little back from the table, near the doorway, which I noticed and filed away. My father started before I had my coat off. He said, that was a childish thing you did. Bridget. I sat down. I put my keys on the table, and I said the only sentence I had actually rehearsed on the drive over. I said, we can talk about how I behaved after we agree on what happened. He said, we know what happened, I said. Then somebody tell me the date I agreed to it. And that was it. That was the whole first half of the evening. And I did not have to do anything else. Because they did it to each other. My mother said she had planned around an assurance from Mary Beth. Mary Beth said an assurance is a strong word for a conversation in a kitchen that Mom started. My father asked Mary Beth why in the world she had canceled Little Bear before anybody talked to me, Mary Beth said. Because Mom said Bridget would do it. My mother said, I said Bridget always does it. That is not the same thing. And Mary Beth said, well, it was the same thing when you said it. Nobody looked at me for about 4 minutes. I sat there with my hands in my lap in the kitchen I grew up in, watching my family cross-examine itself. And I felt absolutely nothing except tired. Grant spoke once during all of it. He said, out loud, to the room, December 3rd. My mother said, what he said. She canceled it on December 3rd, 15 days before anyone spoke to Bridget. I have the email. Mary Beth said his name in a voice like a door closing, so I won that part. I want to be clear that I won it, because of what happened next. Because then I made a mistake. I had the note on my phone, 6 entries, dates, sources, quotes, Terry, Dwayne Kohler, Yolanda Prieto, Nadine. I had it right there in my hand under the table, and I had rehearsed how I would bring it up. And instead of reading it, I said it in my own words. I said, I need to talk about something bigger than the weekend. And I told them that for 4 years, when I was not in a room. My mother had been explaining my absence to people, that she had told the family I was swamped when I had not been invited, that she had told the neighbor I did not love being bothered, that a man at church had spent 2 years thinking I did not want to help. I watched it land, and I watched what happened, and it happened fast. My mother's face went, and then she started to cry, and it was not the performance cry. "That is the part I did not expect," she said. "Is that what you think of me?" she said. "I have never in my life said a bad word about you to anybody, and the awful thing is that she believed it. I could see that she believed it. In my mother's mind, she has never said one unkind thing about me, because none of those sentences were unkind. Swamped is not unkind. Busy is not unkind. She had said nothing but generous things, and the generous things had built a person who was not me. My father said, "So you flew to Hawaii on Christmas Eve, and now you are going back 4 years to find reasons." Mary Beth said, "You are enjoying this." I said I was not. She said, "You have got a list. Do not tell me you do not have a list." And I did. It was in my hand, and I did not take it out, because in that second I understood exactly how it would look and how the story would go afterward. She showed up with a list. She has been going around behind our backs calling people about us. I sat in my mother's kitchen with the evidence in my palm, and I could not use it, because I had gathered it the wrong way, and I knew it. I left 20 minutes later with an apology for nothing and a bill on the table that was still not mine. In the car, I did the thing I had not done once in 11 days. I doubted myself. I sat at the light at 75th, and Noll and I thought, what if she is right? What if I have built a case out of 6 sentences that 6 different people half remember? What if I am a woman who missed one Christmas and has spent a week and a half turning her own family into a conspiracy? I got home at 9 and did not turn a light on. At 11:40, my phone lit up on the counter. "Grant, 1 line. I have heard your mom say that. More than once." Terry picked me up at 7:30 the next morning and took me to a diner on Metcalf that has been there since before I was born. Red vinyl in the booths, patched in 2 places with tape the same color. Bottomless coffee. A woman named Sherry who calls every human being who walks in there Han. He had his work jacket on with the company patch and ordered what he has ordered his whole life: 2 eggs over hard and wheat toast, no potatoes. I said I would have the same because I could not read the menu because I had not slept. He waited until the coffee came. Then he said, "You look like somebody hit you." I told him about the night before. All of it, including the part where I sat there with a list in my hand and could not use it. He nodded through the whole thing like a man listening to a description of a noise a furnace is making. Then he said, "You want to hear about 2019? I said yes. He said, "You know the cabin at Pomme de Terre." I did. Everybody does. It is a 2-bedroom place on a lake in Missouri that has needed a new roof since the Clinton administration. It is my grandmother's. She has been saying for about a decade that she ought to get it into somebody's name so it would be simple later. And she has never done it. He said, "In the spring of 19, your dad decided the place needed rewiring, knob and tube in half of it. He was right. It did." He said, "I found out I was doing it when your mother put it on a list. 3 weekends. He drove down from Shawnee 3 weekends in a row with his own van and his own wire and his own meter, and he pulled the whole first floor, and the only thing anybody asked him was whether he could come back the following Saturday too." He said, "I do that work for a living. 3 weekends of my time in the spring is about $9,000 of work at my rate. And I was not asking anybody for $9,000. I was going to do it for free. I wanted to do it for free. It is my mother's cabin." He said, All I said at the end, at the table, was that it would have been nice to be asked first. He turned his cup around on the saucer. He said, "Your dad told the room I was counting nickels." Then he said, "And everybody laughed. Your mother laughed, honey, not meanly. She laughed the way you laugh when somebody says something that is obviously a joke. Because in that house, the idea that Terry's time is worth money is a joke," I said. "So you stopped coming." He said, "I stopped coming to dinner. I did not stop coming. There is a difference, and it took my wife 2 years to make me see it." Then he looked at me across that table and he said, the thing I had needed somebody to say to me since the 18th of December. And he said it flatly, with no comfort in it at all, which is the only way it would have worked. He said, "You are not imagining it." I put my hands flat on the table and looked at them, and I did not cry in that diner. "But it was close," he said, "and I want you to hear the other half of it, because it is the half that will actually help you." He said, "This family has one rule, and nobody has ever written it down. Whoever does not ask, pays." He said it like a formula, because it is one, if you do not put a number on your time, somebody else will put a 0 on it, not out of malice, because a blank has to be filled with something, and 0 is the easiest thing to fill it with. I said, "So what do I do?" And my Uncle Terry, who has never sat through a management class in his life, gave me better advice than the $740 course I did not finish. He said, "Quit telling them. Telling them is what you did last night. And you lost. And you were right the whole time." He said, "You work in an office. You people have paper for this. Bring them something they cannot argue with, and then do not explain it." He drank his coffee. He said, "My brother has never in his life lost an argument by admitting he was wrong. He loses them by running out of things to say." We talked about nothing for a while. The Chiefs. A furnace board he could not source. Sherry filled us up twice, at the end, while he was putting on his jacket. I asked him whether he thought my grandmother knew any of this was going on. He shrugged into his sleeve and he said, "Hard to say. She is sharp, but she only knows what gets to her out there." Then he said, offhand, "The way you say something you have never once considered. My mother writes to everybody. I get one from her about every month. Always has a $2 bill in it if it is anywhere near my birthday. She writes to Arlene. She writes to a woman she worked with in 1981. You get them too." Right, I said something. I do not remember what I said. He paid over my objection, and he went to a panel change in Shawnee, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of that diner for 15 minutes without starting the engine. 2 facts sat next to each other on the seat with me. My grandmother says she wrote to me. My uncle gets one every month. And I picked that up and I turned it over, and then I put it back down, because I had one day until the 31st, and I had a different fight in front of me, and I did not have room for a second one. I have thought about those 15 minutes more than almost anything else in this story. I went into the office on the 31st, even though we were closed, because the printer is there and because I wanted the real thing and not a photograph of a screen. I printed 2 documents. The first was my sister's Christmas grid. I had the image she had posted in the chat. I cleaned it up, cropped out her thumb, and printed it in color on letter paper, exactly as she made it. The second was our dispatch schedule for Tuesday, December the 15th, an ordinary Tuesday. 14 technicians down the left, half-hour blocks across the top. The after-hours call-out rate in the footer, $285, because it prints on every sheet. And the last column on the right, narrow, headed with 2 words. Tech initials, 14 sets of initials in ballpoint, because every man on that sheet signed it before he took his van out that morning. I put both pages in a folder and drove to Prairie Village at 6 in the evening on New Year's Eve. Everybody was there. My mother, my father, Mary Beth, Grant, and Colin, which surprised me. He was standing by the counter with a soda, and he looked like a man who had been told to be somewhere and did not know why. The folding beds were finally gone from the hallway. Somebody had done that in the last 2 days, and I noticed it, and I did not say anything about it. I did not sit down. I took the 2 pages out of the folder and I laid them side by side on the kitchen table, facing them. And then I did the hardest thing I did in this entire story, which was nothing. I did not talk. I stood there and let 5 adults look at 2 pieces of paper. They are the same document. That is the thing. Same paper size, same grid, same color blocking, because my mother taught both of her daughters to make a list and we both make them the same way. If you saw them across a room, you would not be able to tell which one came out of a heating company and which one came off a refrigerator. My father figured it out first, which I did not expect. He is a man who spent 30 years reading work orders. His eyes went to the right side of my sheet and stopped. I said, "I do this for a living." I put my finger on that last column. I said, "This is the only part your version left out." Nobody said anything for what felt like a long time. Then I said the rest of it, and I said it the way Terry told me to say it, which was flat, with no explaining. I read the 6 entries off my phone. February. My grandmother's 79th at Roseanne's, quote, swamped right now. Source Terry, Thanksgiving 2 years ago, quote, hard to pin down. Source Terry, the funeral in the spring, quote, does not really do that kind of thing. Source Terry, the parish bazaar, sign-up form never delivered. Source Dwayne Kohler, the driveway, quote, does not love being bothered. Source Yolanda Prieto, the July cookout, quote, only stopped by for a minute. Source Nadine. Then I put my phone face down on the table and I stopped talking. I did not editorialize. I did not say what it added up to. Terry was right about that. When you explain a thing, people argue with your explanation instead of your facts. My mother said, "I have never said a bad word about you in my life." I said, "I know." That is why nobody ever corrected it. She said, "Then what am I supposed to have done?" And this is the answer I had been building toward since a diner booth the morning before. I said, "You answered for me. Every single time." And every single time, the reason I was not in the room was that somebody in this family had already sent me somewhere else. I let that sit, I said. In December, I stood in a church basement for 5 hours selling your cookies at a table you signed me up for. And on the same afternoon, you told the woman running the raffle that I could not commit because of my work schedule, Colin said, from over by the counter. Quietly? Oh, that one syllable did more damage in that kitchen than anything I said. My little brother, 25 years old, who has never been assigned a thing in his life, worked it out in 1 second flat. My father put his hand on the table. He said, all right. But nobody is sending anybody an invoice here. We do not do that in this family. Second time he had said it to me in 8 days. I said, I have not asked you for $1. I am not going to. And then I told them the only thing I actually wanted, which I had written down in the car so I would not soften it. 1 line. In the family chat. In writing. Where all 22 of them can see it. That nobody asked me, that the plan was built on an assumption, that the paid sitter was canceled by a decision I had no part in, and that I did not agree to anything. My mother said in front of everyone I said, that is where it happened. She said, do you have any idea how humiliating that would be? And I said the sentence that ended the argument, and I did not raise my voice, and I have never been more certain of anything. I said, I have been humiliated in that chat since the 19th of December. You are asking me to be the only one who has to be. Then it was quiet in my mother's kitchen. The furnace kicked on, which it does at 6:30 because I set the thermostat for her 2 winters ago. And the first person in that room to reach for a phone was not my mother. And it was not my father, it was Grant. Grant typed for about 2 minutes with his thumbs while 5 people watched him do it. What he sent to the family chat said, more or less, that he wanted to clear something up, that Bridget had never been asked to provide childcare and had never agreed to it, that the arrangement had been running for years and that he had benefited from it without ever once asking how it got set up, and that he was sorry. He did not blame his wife in it. I want to say that, because Mary Beth has never given him credit for it. He took his own part, and he left hers alone, and he let her decide what to do with the space. She looked at him like she had never seen him before. Terry answered inside of 40 seconds with 4 words. About time. Thank you. My mother sent hers at 7:11, so about 40 minutes later, after she had gone into the bedroom with the door shut and come back out with her face washed, hers was shorter. She wrote that plans for the holiday had been made based on an assumption rather than a conversation, that Bridget was not asked, and that the paid sitter had been canceled without her knowledge. She wrote that she was sorry for the confusion. Confusion is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence, and we both knew it. I took it anyway. You do not get the apology you wrote in the car. You get the one they are able to make. My father waited until 9:40 the next morning, New Year's Day, and then he wrote one line. He confirmed what Cheryl said. Nothing else. That is my father. That is genuinely as far as that man can go, and I have decided to count it. Then the bills came due, and none of it was anything I did. Grant and Mary Beth paid half the agency invoice, $1,432.50. They had a long weekend booked at Breckenridge for the second week of February, lift tickets and everything, and they canceled it. And Mary Beth told 2 different people that her sister had ruined her ski trip. My father ate the restaurant deposit on the private room. $300 gone for a dinner that 8 people picked at and left early. And then the thing happened that hurt my mother more than either of those, and I did not cause it, and I could not have stopped it. On the 2nd of January, my Aunt Peg wrote in the chat that she and Nadine would host next Christmas at Peg's, and that they would book childcare in the fall and split it among the parents using it. Nobody objected. That was the whole event. 2 sentences and no objections. My mother has hosted Christmas for 16 years. She hosted it the year her own mother died. She hosts it the way some people run for office, and the photograph on the stairs is the campaign poster. And Peg's 2 sentences ended it without anyone having to say a single unkind word. That was on a Saturday. My mother did not respond in the chat at all, and around the edges, other things started shaking loose. Ron, my father's fishing friend, mentioned that he had been charged for gas after a trip he was invited on. My cousin Denise remembered being told at 8 in the morning that she was helping move a piano that day. Somebody brought up a bathroom Terry had tiled. Once one person says a thing out loud, it turns out 4 people were waiting. I did not feel good. I want to be exact about that, because I think people expect a moment here where I sat back and enjoyed it. And I keep looking for that moment, and it is not in my memory. What I felt on the 2nd of January, sitting in my apartment with my coat still on, was tired in a way that sleep does not touch. And underneath the tired was something worse, which took me a while to name. Every single thing that got fixed, got fixed by paper. I got my correction because I had a screenshot. I got the December 3rd date because Grant found an email. I got my mother to stop calling it confusion because I stood in her kitchen and put a dispatch sheet on the table. Not one thing in this entire story was resolved by somebody looking at me and taking my word for it. I had to become a file. I had sources and dates and quotes and a folder on my phone. And the reason I had them is that I knew. At some level, I could not have explained in November that my own account of my own life would not be enough. That is what I mean when I say I did not feel good. I sat there and I thought, this worked. This is what winning looks like in my family. And then I thought a second thing, and it is the closest thing to a premonition I have ever had. I thought, if I had to build a file before anybody believed me, how many other people in this family are walking around as a file that nobody has ever opened? I meant it as a sad little observation. I meant Terry. Probably. Maybe Colin. In some way I had not worked out. I was thinking about the wrong person entirely. Because that night I read my mother's correction one more time, all the way to the end. And I found something in the last line that had nothing to do with Christmas. Here is the last line of my mother's correction, word for word. I hope Bridget knows that nobody in this family has ever shut her out, and that includes her grandmother, who still writes to her every month. I read it 3 times. The first time I read it as what it was meant to be, which was my mother getting one small dig in at the end of an apology, a little flourish. See, we all love you. You are the one who went to Hawaii. The second time I read it as a factual claim. The third time I got up off the couch. I called her. It was almost 10 at night and she does not like the phone after 9 and I did not care. She answered like she had been expecting something else. I said, Mom, the last line of what you wrote, where did you get that? She said, get what? I said that Grandma writes to me every month, and my mother, who had spent 8 days being careful with me, said it the way you say something completely uninteresting. She said, well, Roseanne says it. She is always going on about it. Every month she has to run your grandma's letters to the post office. She has the whole route memorized. She says she should get paid mileage. I said, when did she say that? My mother said, honey, she says it constantly. Thanksgiving. At the pharmacy. She said it at your grandma's birthday. I said okay. I said good night. I hung up on my mother in the middle of her asking me if I had eaten dinner, which I felt bad about for a week. Then I went and got the drawer. Not the junk drawer. The other one. The one in my desk, where I keep things I am not going to throw away. I put them on the table in front of me, in order, because I am the person who does that. 2 Christmases ago, a card with a snowman. Last Christmas, the card with the cardinal on it, which I did not have because I mailed it. But I had the receipt from the drugstore on Antioch in my email, because I bought it with a card, and I keep everything. The summer letter from 3 years ago. 2 pages. I remembered writing it at my kitchen table on a Sunday. I counted it out. In 4 years I had mailed my grandmother 7 cards and 2 letters, birthdays, Christmases, 1 Easter, and the long one, 9 pieces of mail. Nothing came back. Not one time. And the last thing my grandmother said to me about it, 4 days earlier, sitting in her recliner with a cup of coffee she had made too strong, was, why did you never write back? I sat at my table for a long time with 9 dates written on a piece of paper. I want to describe the feeling accurately, because it was not the feeling I expected. It was not anger. Anger came later, and it came in a different shape than you would think. It was dread. The specific, cold, sinking dread of standing at the front of a job you already know is going to be worse than the customer described. You have not opened the panel yet. You just know. Around 11, Marisol called. She did not ask about my family. She has good instincts. She called to tell me about a patient at the clinic that afternoon, a man of about 70, who had spent his entire cleaning appointment trying to get the receptionist's phone number and had finally offered her a coupon for a car wash. We laughed until I had to put the phone down on the table. I want that in this story. In the middle of the worst 2 weeks of my life, on the 2nd of January, sitting in front of a list of 9 dates. I laughed at a man with a car wash coupon until my stomach hurt. Then she said, "Get some sleep," and I said I would. And I did not. Here is where I want to stop and tell you what I thought I had learned at the end of that night, because I was wrong in a way that matters. I thought the worst thing that can happen inside a family is to be described incorrectly, to have a version of you circulating in rooms you are not in, built out of sentences you never said, sentences so mild that nobody could ever be blamed for saying them. And I had learned that you can fight that. It is expensive and it is exhausting and it requires you to become a person who keeps receipts. But it can be done. There are witnesses. There is a chat with 22 people in it. You can get one line in writing and the record changes. That is what I believed on the 2nd of January. What was sitting in a ground floor apartment in Olathe could not be corrected. There was no line anybody could write, no chat, no witness, no signature at the bottom of a page. Because the thing that had been taken was not my reputation. It was 4 years of a 79-year-old woman's life, and 4 years of mine. And there is no correction for that. There is no getting them back. And the person who took them was not my mother, and it was not my sister. It was the only human being in that entire family who had ever sat down beside me and asked if I was all right. I drove out to Olathe on the morning of the 3rd without calling first. On the way, I did the thing I do, which by that point in this story you can predict. At a red light on college, I opened the note on my phone and made 2 columns. Left side, 9 dates, every card, every letter, 4 years, right side, nothing. Then I spent the rest of the drive arguing with myself. And I want you to hear that argument, because I think it is the most important thing in this whole story, and it is the part people skip. She is 79. Old people say they wrote to you. Old people mean to write to you, and the meaning to feel's the same as the doing. And then it is 2 years later. You have spent 16 days building cases against your own family. You found one that was real and it worked. And now you are a woman with a hammer. Your mother cried in her own kitchen and you did not believe her. That last one had teeth. Because my mother had been telling the truth about herself, in her way. She really had never said one bad word about me. The damage was real and her innocence was also real. And if I could get something that wrong in one direction, I could get it wrong in the other. I made myself say it out loud in the car. There is probably nothing here. And then, at the turn onto her street, the thing Terry said in the parking lot came back and would not leave. I get one about every month. Pauline was at the desk. She waved me through and asked if I was the granddaughter from the heating company, which told me my grandmother talks about me to the front desk, which did something to my chest I was not ready for. Dell was at her table by the window doing her pills, Sunday through Saturday, 4 compartments a day, and she does it with the concentration of a woman diffusing something. She would not let me talk until she finished the row. Then she put the lid down and said, "Twice in a week." "What is wrong?" I said nothing was wrong. I said I had a question that was going to sound strange. She said, "Ask it." So I did. I said, "Grandma, when you write a letter these days, "How does it get mailed?" And she answered it exactly the way you answer a question about something completely ordinary, which is what it was to her. She said, "I write it out. I put it in the envelope. I put the stamp on it out of the roll in the tin. And I give it to Roseanne. She comes by Thursdays." I said, "Do you ever take them down yourself?" She said, "There is no outgoing box anymore. There used to be a slot in the lobby, but they took it out when they redid the mailroom." "Oh, 2 years ago." "Now you are supposed to leave it at the desk," I said. "So why not the desk?" And my grandmother said, "Because Roseanne says the desk loses things." I did not move. I have thought 100 times about what my face did in that second and whether she saw it. I do not think she did. She had already gone on to something else. She was telling me about a woman down the hall whose birthday card came back to her marked wrong address. Roseanne says the desk loses things. 20 minutes of my grandmother's afternoon went by and I heard almost none of it, because I was standing in a hallway in my own head, opening a panel, every Thursday, for years, a woman who was at the building anyway, who is helpful, who is the only one who shows up, offering to carry the mail out. It is not even a favor you would remember somebody doing. It is the smallest possible thing. Eventually, she asked if I wanted more coffee, and I said yes to have something to do with my hands. And while she was up, I asked the second question. I said, "Grandma, you said the other day you keep the drafts." And her whole face changed. Because I had asked her about a thing she is proud of, she said, "I have kept a draft of every letter I have written since 1979. She said it started at the insurance office, because you had to keep a carbon of everything that went out, and after enough years of it, she could not stop. She said she did it for her brother's letters, and for Arlene, and for the complaint she wrote to the gas company in '96. She said, "I have got a whole box of them. If I write something, I want to know what I said, because otherwise you repeat yourself and people are too polite to tell you." I put my cup down. I said, "Can I see them?" And my grandmother, 79 years old, sharp as a tack, who had spent 4 years believing her granddaughter had stopped answering her, said, "Sure, honey, they are under the bed." She would not let me go get it. She went into the bedroom herself, and I stood in the doorway and listened to a 79-year-old woman get down onto one knee beside her own bed, using the nightstand, breathing through her teeth. When she came back out, she had it in both hands. I knew it before I could see the lid. It is a butter cookie tin, royal blue, with the ring of gold cookies printed around the top and the fluted paper cups printed underneath them, the kind that shows up in this country every December and then lives in a house for 20 years holding something else. There has never been a cookie in it. Not once in my entire life. I opened that tin every single time I was in her apartment from the time I could reach the shelf. From 6 years old, hoping, and it has always been thread. She set it on the table and pried the lid off with her thumbnail, the way she always has. And there it all was. The spools, the tomato pin cushion with the little strawberry hanging off it, about 40 loose buttons, and on top of the buttons, held together with 2 rubber bands that had gone hard and cracked, a stack of folded lined paper. She said, "There they are." I said, "May I?" She said, "They are letters to you. Honey, of course you can." I sat down at her table, and I took the rubber bands off and they broke in my hands, both of them. 11 sheets of lined paper folded in thirds in my grandmother's handwriting, every one of them dated in the top right corner, because she is a woman who worked in an office for 31 years, and there is no version of her that does not date a page. The oldest was from 4 years ago in March. The newest was from the 11th of November. 11 letters to me in 4 years, that I had never seen a word of, and under them, more, dozens, to Arlene, to her brother in Wichita before he died, to a woman named Rosemary she worked with in 1981, and 4 or 5 to Terry, and I checked the dates on those, because I am who I am. 2 of Terry's were from the same months as 2 of mine, the same week, in one case, written at the same table, with the same pen, and handed off on the same Thursday. He got his... I got nothing. I want to explain what happened in my body at that table, because I have described a lot of feelings in this story, and this one was different. It was not grief, and it was not rage. It was nausea, physical, immediate, the kind where you have to put your palm flat on a table. My grandmother had no idea. That is the thing. She was standing at her own counter, pouring coffee she had already poured, chatting, pleased that I was interested, saying something about how her handwriting got worse after the wrist. I said, "Grandma, sit down a minute." And I read her the oldest one out loud, because I could not read it silently and keep my face. It was about nothing. That is what took me apart. It was about the washing machine on the lower level that had gone out, and how the man who came to fix it was from Independence and knew her cousin. It was about a bird that had built a nest in the corner of the balcony, in the gutter, and how she was not going to tell maintenance. It asked whether my back was still bothering me from that summer I moved apartments. It said the weather had turned and she had gotten the good coat out. 400 words about laundry and a bird, and at the bottom, in the last 2 lines, this: "I have not heard from you in a while. Honey." Have I done something to upset you? If I have, I would rather you told me than not. I put it down and picked up the next one, August, same year. Same thing at the end, phrased a little differently. She wondered if she had said something at Easter. The next one, February of last year, right around her birthday. The party at Roseanne's house that I did not know about. 3 lines about the cake. Then, at the bottom, whether I was angry with her about something and whether it was because she had not been able to come to my apartment when I moved. I went through all 11. It took a long time because I kept having to stop and look out the sliding door at the feeder she is not allowed to have. In 9 of them, somewhere near the end, in 9 different arrangements of very careful words, my grandmother asked me what she had done wrong. She never once got angry, not on a single page. She never wrote a line that put it on me. Every letter, for 4 years, she took it as her own fault and asked to be told so she could fix it. My grandmother spent the last 4 years of being able to get down on the floor by herself, sitting in that apartment on Thursdays, handing an envelope to somebody at the door, and privately going back over Easter dinners looking for the moment she had lost me. I told her what I had sent. I did it the way I would read a service history to a customer, because that is the only way I could get through it without my voice going. 7 cards and 2 letters. I gave her the dates off my phone, and she did something I did not expect. For everyone, she told me where she had been. The Christmas card with the snowman, 2 years ago, she said, that would have been the winter they had the water main break out front. I was doing my mail in the lobby. The long letter 3 summers ago. She said, that was the summer of the air conditioning, honey. I would have remembered that one. The card with the cardinal. She looked at the ceiling for a moment and said, last December. I was still driving then. She said it like a woman checking a receipt against a statement. She did not miss one. Then she stopped, and she put both hands flat on the tin in her lap. And she did not say anything for a long time. The refrigerator ran. Somebody went by in the hallway with one of those rolling walkers with the tennis balls on the legs. I did not fill the silence. That is the single best thing I did in this entire story. And I did it by accident, because I could not think of anything to say. My grandmother worked it out herself, sitting in her own chair, with the tin on her knees. She said, "She told me you were swamped." That was it. That was the whole sentence. She did not say a name. She did not need to, and neither do I, because you have known for 3 pages. And so had I. And so, I think, had she, for longer than she would ever admit. I said, "Grandma." And she said no. Wait. She got up. She was mid-sentence with herself, and she stood up and went to the stove and put the kettle on, because she did not know what else to do with her hands, and she is of a generation that answers everything with a kettle. Neither of us drinks tea. She had put on a kettle for tea that did not exist. Then she stood there with her back to me, holding the counter with one hand, and she said the thing that broke me open. She said, "I am so sorry, honey." I said, "What?" She turned around, and her eyes were wet, and she said it again. She said, "I am sorry. I thought you were done with me." She said, "I thought I had gotten to be too much. Old people get to be too much and nobody tells them. I thought, well, she is 28. She has got a job and a life. And I was somebody she had to drive out to Olathe for." She said, "I made up my mind about a year ago to stop asking because I did not want to be a woman who pesters her granddaughter." That is what she had done with 4 years. She had used them to build a very careful, very generous, completely wrong explanation, in which the fault was entirely her own and the correct response was to take up less room. I got up and I put my arms around my grandmother in her kitchen, and she was smaller than the last time I had done it, which is a thing nobody warns you about. The kettle went off. We let it go for a while. Then she reached over and turned the burner off without letting go of me, which I thought was very much her. When we sat back down, I asked her what she wanted to do. I want to be clear that I asked it as an actual question. I had ideas. I had a whole plan forming, and it involved a drive to a house in Olathe and a conversation I was going to enjoy in a way I am not proud of. And my grandmother said, "I want to read them." I said, "Read what she said, my letters, all 11, in order from the beginning." She said, "I want to know what I said to you." So that is what we did. We spent the rest of that afternoon at her table reading 11 letters out loud in chronological order, from 4 years back to the 11th of November, and it took until it got dark, because we kept stopping. We stopped so she could tell me how the washing machine story ended. We stopped because the bird in the gutter came back the following spring, and she had gotten a photograph of it on her flip phone that she made me look at. We stopped at the February one because she wanted to tell me about the cake, which was the grocery store kind with the shortening frosting, and that Roseanne had gotten the good one with the raspberry in the middle because she knows Dell likes it. She said that without any edge on it at all. She was not making a point. I have thought about that detail more than almost anything else in this story. My aunt bought her mother the right cake. Around 5:30, the light went orange and then gray, and neither of us got up to turn a lamp on. My grandmother folded the last letter along its old creases and put it back on the pile and squared the pile up with 2 hands, the way she squares up everything. Then she said the only thing she said about her daughter that entire afternoon. And it was not an accusation, and it was not a question about the letters at all. She said, "Is she very tired, honey?" And I sat there in the dark in her kitchen and could not answer her. Because the answer was yes. I did not drive to my aunt's house that night, and I want to tell you why. Because everything I did on the 4th of January came out of a mistake I had made 6 days earlier. On the 29th, I had sat in my mother's kitchen and accused a woman of something. and I had been right about the facts and completely wrong about the shape of her. I had walked in there with a theory, and it had cost me the room. I was not doing that again in a driveway in Olathe. So I spent the 4th on the phone. Nadine first. I told her, plainly, what was in the tin. I did not soften it, and I did not tell her what it meant, because she is a grown woman, and she can do arithmetic. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Ask me what you want to ask me," I said. "Does your mom take Grandma's mail out?" She said, "Every Thursday. Has for years. It is a whole thing. She goes out there after her shift, does the pillbox, takes the trash down, takes whatever mail Grandma has, and comes home." I said, "Have you ever seen her drop it?" And Nadine said, "No." Then she said the part that made my hands cold. She said, "There is a grocery bag in the trunk of her Corolla. Paper 1, from Hy-Vee, folded over at the top. It has been in there so long the bottom has gone soft." I asked her about it once, maybe 2 years ago, and she said it was Grandma's stuff. She said, "Bridget, I want to be fair to my mother. I never looked in it. I have no idea what is in it. She could have a bag of birdseed in her trunk." I said I knew. Then I called Terry and I asked him one question. I asked him to go get the last letter his mother sent him and read me the postmark. He put the phone down and I heard him walking, and then a drawer. And then he came back and said, "Olathe, Kansas, November the 16th. So she mails them. That is the thing that took the last of the doubt out of me. My aunt drives Dell's mail out every Thursday, and she puts it in the box. Arlene gets hers. Terry gets his. Rosemary in Wichita gets hers. One person's mail, out of all of it. Never made it to the box." Then I went back into the family chat on my phone and I scrolled all the way up. Past Christmas, past the argument, past the correction, to the 19th of December. And I found it. My Aunt Roseanne, in the middle of a thread about folding beds and salad, writing, "Anybody need me to grab your grandma's mail this week? I am going by Thursday like always." 22 people in that chat. 0 replies. My mother posted about the basement 9 minutes later. Aunt Peg asked about the salad. Ron sent a snowman. I had read that message on the 19th of December, on my break, standing in the parts room with a coffee going cold. I had read it, and I had scrolled straight past it, because I was busy building a case about how invisible I was. The last call I made that day was to my father. I asked him who handles my grandmother's paperwork, her insurance, the building, the medical forms. He said, "Roseanne, obviously. She does all that. She has always done all that." I said, "When did you last drive your mother to a doctor?" There was a pause on that line that went on long enough to be its own answer. He said, "Well, she has got people out there." Dad. When? He said he would have to think about it. He is her son. He lives 22 minutes away. He is retired. I hung up and I sat in my apartment and I finally understood how a thing like this runs for 4 years without a single person noticing. It is not that my aunt was clever. She was not clever at all. The mechanism was one paper bag and a sentence about the front desk losing things. It ran because nobody in my family was looking in that direction. Not one person. Roseanne had complete, unwatched, unquestioned control of an old woman's outgoing mail for 6 years. And the reason she had it is that she was the only one who ever showed up. And the reason she was the only one who ever showed up is that everybody else had somebody else to do it. I was so angry that night that my jaw hurt in the morning. And underneath the anger, coming up through it where I could not get away from it, was something I did not want and did not ask for. I was starting to see the shape of it. Not a plot, not a scheming woman, a tired one, 6 years of Thursdays, pill boxes, emergency rooms at 3 in the morning, a pharmacy manager on her feet all day driving out to Olathe after her shift to take somebody else's trash down. I did not want that in my head. I had a perfectly good villain and I wanted to keep her. I looked up her address before I went to bed, and that is when I noticed the last thing. I had to look it up. I am 28 years old, and I had to search my own aunt's address, because in 28 years, I had never once been to her house. My aunt lives in a brick ranch on a street of brick ranches about 10 minutes from my grandmother, with a driveway that has a crack running corner to corner and a basketball hoop over the garage with no net on it. I got there a little after 4 on the 5th of January. It had snowed 2 inches overnight and she was out front with a shovel, still in her work polo under her coat, doing the last third of the drive. I did not bring the tin. I brought 1 page, the oldest letter, 4 years back in March, in a plastic sleeve from my desk at work because I did not want it to get wet. She saw the car before I was out of it. She stopped and stood there with both hands on the shovel handle and watched me come up the drive. And she did not say hello, and neither did I. I held out the page. She took it with her glove off and read maybe 2 lines. Then she put the shovel down against the garage, very carefully, like she was setting down something that could break. And she said, "You want the bag." I want you to understand that she did not deny anything, not 1 word, not for 1 second. I had gone over there with 3 different versions of the argument in my head, and I did not get to use any of them. She walked to the Corolla parked at the curb and opened the trunk, and stood there a moment with her back to me. Then she came back holding a paper grocery sack folded over twice at the top, soft at the bottom corners the way paper goes when it has been somewhere warm for a long time. She handed it to me and went back and picked up the shovel and started working again, which I think is the only way she could stand to be there. I opened it on the hood of her car. 11 envelopes, sealed, stamped. My name on every one of them in my grandmother's handwriting, the letters getting a little shakier as the dates got closer to now. One of them had my old address on 87th Street. The other 10 had my current address. I stood in the snow in my aunt's driveway holding 10 envelopes that had never been mailed to an address that somebody had gone to the trouble of updating. She had corrected the address. On letters she was not going to send. That is the detail I still cannot get all the way around. Whatever was happening in my aunt. It was not indifference. Indifference does not proofread. I said, "Why did you keep them? Why not throw them away?" And she said, over her shoulder, still shoveling, I was going to mail them. She said, "Every week I put them in the car. Every week I told myself I would drop them at the box on Santa Fe. And then I would get home and there they would be." I said, 4 years. She said, "I know how long it was." Then she stopped. And she stood up, and she leaned the shovel against her hip, and my Aunt Roseanne told me the rest of it in about 90 seconds without ever once raising her voice. 6 years. Every Thursday and most Sundays. The pill boxes. The building's paperwork. The insurance appeals. The 2 hours on hold with the pharmacy benefit people in October. 2 emergency rooms. 1 at 3 in the morning in February with the wind chill below 0. Sitting in a plastic chair until 7. The grab bar in the bathroom that she bought and installed herself with a drill she borrowed, because her brothers were going to get to it. She said, "In 6 years, not 1 person in this family has ever asked me if I was busy." She said, "Your dad calls me twice a year, and both times it is to ask a question about our mother that he could have found out by going out there." Then she said it, and she said it quietly, and it went into me like a nail. She said, "You are the one this family misses. I am the one it calls. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say to that, because it was true. I asked her the only thing I had actually come to ask. I said, "What were you going to do about the cabin?" And she told me that too. She said twice, once in the spring and once about a year ago. She had gotten a form from the bank, the kind where you name who a thing goes to, and she had filled in the part she could fill in and taken it out there and put it in front of her mother. I said, and she said both times, "Your grandmother read it and put it down, and said, 'Let me ask Bridget what she thinks.' She said it flat, no self-pity in it at all, which somehow made it worse. 6 years of Thursdays." And her mother's answer twice was to ask the granddaughter who had not come out to Olathe in over a year. That is what the letters were for, not the house. She kept 11 envelopes in a grocery bag in a trunk for 4 years, so that a name would stop coming up in a room she was the only one who ever entered. Then she picked the shovel back up, and she looked at me, and she asked me a question I have not stopped hearing since. She said, "You flew to Hawaii because they took 3 days off you." She said, "What do you do about 6 years? I sat in my car in front of my aunt's house for a while, with the engine running and the wipers going every 8 seconds on the intermittent setting. The bag was on the passenger seat. Here is what I worked out sitting there. And it is the reason I am telling you this story at all, because the Christmas part is a good story and this part is the true one. My Aunt Roseanne is me. She is me at 52. If I had never once gotten on an airplane, same house, same rule, she was the one who showed up, and because she was the one who showed up, she stopped being a person with a schedule and became a resource with an address. My father does not call his sister. He calls the arrangement. Nobody in that family has ever said thank you to her in a way that took longer than 1 syllable, and nobody has ever asked her a single question about her own week. I know exactly what that does to you, because it was doing it to me, and I had only had 4 years of it, and she has had 6 on top of 20 before that. And then, sitting in that car, I heard Terry in the diner booth. Whoever does not ask, pays. That is the whole family in 5 words, and it works in both directions, and I had only ever heard it going one way. Roseanne never asked. Not once in 6 years. She never said, "I need help with Thursdays," or "Somebody else take the pharmacy," or "This is costing me my evenings and I would like it counted." So she went and took it out of the drawer instead, and because she could not take it from the people who owed it, my father and my mother and every other adult who had a reason to be somewhere else, she took it from the one person in the whole arrangement who had no part in creating it. An old woman's mail, and her granddaughter. That is the part I need to be exact about, because I have told this story out loud twice now, and both times somebody has said, "Well, you can see her side. I do. I saw it standing in the snow, and I have not stopped seeing it." Seeing why a person did a thing is not the same as the thing being allowed. My grandmother spent 4 years sitting in a chair by a window going back over Easter dinners, looking for the moment she had said something that lost her granddaughter. She got a year older every year while she did it. She made a decision, about a year ago, to stop asking, so that she would not be a woman who pesters people. There is no accounting in the world in which 6 years of Thursdays buys that. There is no exchange rate. It is not a debt that could be settled with somebody else's 4 years. Because those 4 years did not belong to my aunt to spend, that is the difference between us. And it is the only difference. And it is everything. I got taken from and I built a boundary. She got taken from and she built a collection. One of those ends. The other one just keeps going until somebody finds a paper bag in a trunk. And I will tell you the last thing I thought in that car, which I did not enjoy at all. On the 19th of December, my aunt put a message into a chat with 22 people in it, asking if anyone needed her to take their mother's mail out. Nobody answered her. 22 people. I was one of them. I had been standing in the parts room at work, building a case about being invisible in that family. And I scrolled straight past a woman who was more invisible than I was. I am not equating those two things. Mine did not involve stealing anybody's letters. But I am not going to sit here and tell you I was the only person in that family paying attention. Because I was not. I was paying attention to my own file. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store on Santa Fe. I did not need anything. I stood in front of the freezer case for about 10 minutes with my hands in my coat pockets, looking at bags of peas, not thinking about peas. Then I went 2 aisles over to the holiday end cap they had not taken down yet, and I bought a tin of Danish butter cookies. The blue one, the ring of gold cookies printed on the lid, $4 and something. I could not have told you why. I sat in the parking lot with it on the seat next to the paper bag, and I thought, that was a strange thing to do. Bridget. Then I called my grandmother. I said, "Can I come out in the morning?" She said, "Of course, honey." And then she said, "Is something wrong?" I said, "No." I said, "But I would like Dad there. And I would like Roseanne there." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "What for?" And I said the only sentence I had gotten right on the first try in 3 weeks. I said, "So you can talk." Not me. 5 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment at 10 in the morning on the 6th of January. My grandmother in her chair. My father on the good chair nobody sits in, which he took without being offered, because he is the oldest. Roseanne on a kitchen chair she had carried in herself, sitting on the front 2 inches of it. Terry standing by the sliding door with his coat on. Me on the arm of the couch. My mother was not there. Nobody had invited her, and nobody remarked on it, and I think everyone in that room understood why and would have denied it under oath. On the table were 2 things, the blue tin and the folded paper sack. I said one sentence the entire first half of that morning, I said. Grandma has some things she wants to ask. Then I sat down and shut up. My grandmother did not accuse anybody of anything. I need you to understand that, because I had spent the drive out there braced for a scene, and what she did instead was so much worse for the people in that room. She asked questions. She started with my father. She said, "Alan, when did you last take me to a doctor?" He said, "Ma." She said, "When?" He said something about her having people out there. He said something about the schedule at the iPlace being hard to get. He got about 40 seconds into it, and then he stopped on his own, in the middle of a sentence, because there is no version of that answer that sounds like anything. That was the second time in 3 days he had been asked that question by somebody in his own family and had not been able to answer it. Then she turned to her daughter, and she did not ask her about the letters. She never asked her about the letters, not that morning, not ever, and I have thought about that decision for a long time. She said, "Roseanne, are you tired?" My aunt made a sound I am not going to try to describe. She had held it together in a snowy driveway with me the day before. She had held it together for 6 years. Her mother asked her one 3-word question in a warm room, and she came apart in about a second and a half, with her hands over her face, in front of her 2 brothers. Terry crossed the room and put his hand on her shoulder and did not say anything. Nobody else moved. My father looked at the carpet. When she could talk, she said, "Yes." That was all she said. Yes. Then my grandmother looked at me and said, "Bridget, do you want that cabin?" I said, "No." She said, "Are you saying that to be nice?" I said, "No. Grandma, I have been to that cabin 4 times in my life. I do not want it." She nodded once, and then she asked me to get the legal pad out of the drawer under the phone, the one where she keeps the pad and the good pen. and she wrote out 3 things in her own hand while 5 people sat there and watched her do it. She read them out loud when she finished. 1. The cabin stays in her name until she dies, and she is not signing anything about it before then. She wrote out, underneath, who gets which weeks, and she gave Roseanne the 4th of July week, which is the good one, and everybody in that room knew it was the good one. 2. From now on, looking after her gets paid for. Her son and her daughter are to work out a number between the 2 of them, put it on paper, sign it, and give her a copy for her file. She said the word file. 31 years at an insurance office. 3. Her mail goes out herself. First Tuesday of the month, on the building van that goes to the pharmacy and the post office, Pauline runs the sign-up sheet. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then my father said it. He could not help himself. He said it the way you say a thing you have said your whole life without ever once looking at it. He said, "Ma, come on. We do not send each other invoices in this family." And my grandmother, 79 years old, who had spent 4 years thinking her granddaughter was done with her, put the pen down on the legal pad and looked at her son. She said, "No, Alan, we do not send invoices." She said, "We pick somebody and we never pay them." Nobody moved. The heater came on under the window. She said, "I did it to your sister for 6 years and I never once asked her what it cost her. And I am the one who taught the rest of you it was free." That is the only time that morning that my grandmother took anything on herself. And she did not do it to let anybody else off. My father signed it that afternoon. He did not sign it because he understood. I want to be honest about my own father. He signed it because his mother was sitting 3 feet away looking at him, and because Terry was standing by the door, and because there was nothing left in the room to argue with. Understanding came later, in pieces, and less of it than I would have liked. My father and my aunt settled on a number 11 days later. I do not know what it is, and I have never asked. Terry told me it took 2 phone calls, and that the second one was short. Roseanne got the first payment at the end of January. She did not thank anybody. She did not apologize to me, then or ever. What she did was send me 1 text message on a Wednesday night at 9:40. "She is expecting you Saturday." That is it. That is the whole message. No punctuation at the end. I sat and looked at it for a while, and I decided to take it as the thing it was, which was the closest my Aunt Roseanne is able to get. Some people hand you an apology. Some people hand you a Saturday. My father started driving his mother to appointments. Once a month, the eye doctor and whatever else is on the list. He is bad at it. The first time, he got turned around coming back from the eye place in Overland Park because they had dilated her eyes, and she could not read the signs for him, which is apparently how he has been navigating for 40 years. Terry heard about it from Pauline at the front desk and called me laughing so hard he had to pull over. But he goes. He has not missed one. My mother and I did not make up. I want to put that here plainly. In the middle, rather than at the end where it would land like a tragedy, because I do not experience it as one. She found out about the letters from Aunt Peg, not from me. She called me the following week and she talked for 11 minutes. And in 11 minutes she did not ask one question about my grandmother. What she said more than once, in different arrangements, was that she could not believe Roseanne would put her in a position like this, that she had repeated what Roseanne told her in good faith, that now she was going to look like part of it. I let her get to the end. Then I said I had to go, and I said it kindly, and I hung up. She still says the sentence. After everything we have done for you, she said it in February about a wedding, and she will say it again. Here is what changed. It does not move me anymore. It used to work like a lever. She would say it and something in my chest would tip and I would start negotiating. Now she says it and I hear it the way you hear a car alarm 2 streets over. It is a sound a thing makes. It is not information. We talk about once a month. It is polite. It is not warm. I have stopped grading myself on that. Mary Beth did not speak to me for 7 weeks. Then, in the 3rd week of February, she called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and she did not open with an apology. She opened with, "Do you have any idea how hard it is with 3 of them?" I said, "I do." And I said, "That is exactly why you should be careful with anybody you ask to help." She went quiet, and then she said the most honest thing my sister has ever said to me, which was that she had assumed I would give in because I always had, and that she had never once thought about it any harder than that. That is not an apology. I know it is not an apology. It is the truth, said out loud, by someone who had never said it before, and in my family that is a considerable distance. In April, she asked me to watch the kids for an evening. She asked 3 weeks in advance. She said in the message that she would pay me, and she named a number without me having to say anything. I said no. I had the class those nights. And she said, "Okay, no problem." And that was the entire exchange. Reader. I read that message 4 times. Okay, no problem. 2 sentences that cost her nothing and that I had waited 17 years for. Grant and Mary Beth started seeing somebody in February. She told me about it in the same call, angrily, as though it were an item on the bill. They paid the $1,432, and the Breckenridge weekend did not happen. Colin still does not get assigned anything. That has not changed, and I do not know that it ever will, because it is 30 years deep. But in March, I moved a couch out of my apartment, and he showed up on a Saturday morning with a dolly he had borrowed from work, and nobody had asked him to. And nobody had put his name in a box. He said, "Mom said you were doing this today." Then he said, and I noticed he said it carefully, "Is that all right? That I came?" None of this was a punishment I thought up. That is what I keep coming back to. I did not build any of it. I did not want most of it. The ski weekend, my mother losing Christmas, my father lost on Metcalf with his mother squinting at road signs. Those were costs that had been running the whole time. All that happened in those 4 weeks is that somebody finally addressed the envelopes to the people who ran them up. On the 11th of January, I re-enrolled in the Operations Management Certificate at the community college. Same program, same building, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6 to 9, 16 weeks, $740, again, out of my own checking account, which is a sentence I typed into my banking app while making a face. Then I did the thing I had never done in 28 years. I put it in the family chat. I wrote that starting the 12th. I had class Tuesday and Thursday nights through the end of April, that I was not available on those evenings, and that I was telling everyone now so nobody had to plan around finding out later. My mother replied within 4 minutes. She wrote, "Even if there is an emergency, old me would have written back a paragraph. Old me would have listed the kinds of emergencies I would consider. And by the end of the week, the 2 evenings would have quietly stopped existing." What I wrote was, "I will decide about emergencies when there is one." That is not a compromise. I want to be clear about the difference because it took me most of a winter to learn it. A compromise is when you give up half of a thing. That sentence gave up nothing. It is a term. It is the same thing I say to a customer who wants to know if we can come out before 9, which is, "I will tell you when I know." Nobody in that chat pushed on it. Not one person. 17 years I had been afraid of that conversation, and it took 9 words. I finished the program on the 29th of April. In June, Halverson posted the operations coordinator job internally. I applied on a Monday and interviewed on a Thursday with the general manager and a woman from the corporate office who asks me one question about a scheduling failure, and then listened to me talk for 11 minutes without interrupting. I got it the following week. The raise, over a year, comes to about 4.5 times what that trip to Maui cost me, which is a piece of arithmetic I did on a napkin and have never told anybody until right now. There is a small office. It has a window that opens. I did not feel triumphant on my first day in it, either. I keep waiting for the triumphant part in this story, and it never shows up. What I felt was quiet. I sat in that office and looked at the board through the doorway, and then I did one small thing that nobody in that building has ever mentioned to me. We email the schedule out to the technicians now. In addition to the printed sheet, the emailed version had never had the last column on it, because you cannot sign an email. So somewhere along the way, somebody had dropped it. I put it back. A narrow column on the right of the emailed version, with 2 words at the top, and a line under each name. And a note asking every man to reply with his initials before he takes his van out. It took me about 20 minutes to change the template. Nobody noticed. 14 men reply to that email every morning, and not one of them has ever said a word about it. I notice. Here is the part of the year that actually matters, though, and it is not the job. Every Saturday I drive out to Olathe. We write letters. Writing letters to each other would be ridiculous. So we write them to other people. Arlene, in Topeka, Rosemary, the woman from the insurance office in 1981, who turned out to still be alive and living with her son in Wichita. Terry, who gets one from his mother and one from his niece in the same envelope now, and who claims it is a waste of a stamp. My grandmother dictates and I write, because her wrist is bad in the cold. She makes me start over if it gets sloppy. She has made me start over 4 times. Then, on the first Tuesday of every month, she rides the building van to the pharmacy and the post office with 3 or 4 other residents, and she mails them herself. Pauline runs the sign-up sheet and saves her a seat by the door. She has not asked anyone to take an envelope out for her since the 6th of January. In February, she sent me a birthday card. Inside it was a $2 bill, which she had gotten from the bank in a stack, the way she used to. I have not spent it. And I will tell you the one thing about all of this that I cannot fix. Since I have told you everything else, the money did not matter. $1,850 for a plane ticket and a bed, $2,865 for an agency, $740 twice for a class. All of it was recoverable. Every number in this story got paid, one way or another, by somebody. What nobody can hand back is 11 letters. I have them. I have read all 11, in order, twice. They are in the drawer in my desk with the cards I kept. But I read them at 28, sitting at my own table, alone. I was supposed to read them at 24, and 25, and 26, while she still went down to the laundry on her own and drove herself to the store, and could get down on one knee by her bed without holding the nightstand. That is the only bill in this whole story that came back marked unpayable. The following Christmas was at Cedar Ridge. Aunt Peg had said she would host, and then in October she moved it out to my grandmother's building instead, because the community room is free for residents, and because it meant Dell would not have to be driven anywhere in December. Peg did that on her own. Nobody asked her to. 3 folding tables pushed together with paper cloths taped down at the corners. A ham from the deli counter. Somebody's slow cooker on an extension cord that ran along the baseboard, which Terry looked at for about 4 seconds too long and then decided to let go. Child care was booked in the 2nd week of October, paid for by the parents who were using it, and confirmed by email. That is on the sign-up sheet Pauline keeps, because it is my grandmother's rule, and Pauline enforces my grandmother's rules with more energy than my grandmother does. Peg told me afterward that the two sitters spent most of the evening at the far end of the room playing cards with Pauline, because nobody at that table wanted anybody moved anywhere. Roseanne came. She sat on my grandmother's left, where she has sat for 6 years. And she cut the ham because she is the one who knows how Dell likes it cut. She and I have exchanged maybe 5 sentences all year. She still sends me a text on Wednesday nights when she has done the pillbox, and it always says the same thing, which is a day and nothing else. Saturday. I go on Saturday. I do not know if that will ever be more than it is. I have stopped needing it to be. My mother came 40 minutes late and sat at the far end and talked mostly to Peg. She and I said hello, and we said Merry Christmas, and we asked each other one question apiece. There is no scene in this story where my mother and I fix it. I have decided that is all right, and I would rather tell you that than make something up. At one point, Terry, across the table, with a plate in his hand, asked whether anybody had gotten scheduled this year. Nobody laughed out loud. Everybody heard it. I came as a guest. I did not carry a single chair. When I got up to clear something, Nadine took it out of my hand. I brought one thing with me, the blue tin with the gold cookies printed on the lid, the one I bought in a grocery store parking lot in January without knowing why. I put it on the table next to my grandmother's elbow. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. Then she picked it up and pried the lid off with her thumbnail the way she has done my entire life. There were cookies in it. She laughed. She did not say anything at all. And neither did I. And I do not think anybody else at that table understood what had happened, and it did not matter one bit. So, here is where I am going to stop. I did not ruin a dinner. I did not expose anybody's secret. I did not invent a single punishment for a single person in this story. All I did, on the 18th of December, was take back 3 days that had never been given. Everything after that was arithmetic, an agency rate, a deposit, a ski weekend, a 16-year run as the host of Christmas. Those were not things I did to my family. Those were the actual costs of the way my family had been operating, and for years the reason nobody could see them is that they were being quietly absorbed by 2 women who never sent a bill. One of us went to Hawaii, the other one put 11 envelopes in a paper bag. I understand both of those women. I only defend one of them, because the answer to being used is a boundary. It is not an invoice you go and collect from somebody who had nothing to do with it. And here's the thing I actually came out of that year knowing, which is smaller than a lesson and truer than one. They were not loving me. They were scheduling me. Those 2 things can look identical from the inside for 28 years. And there is exactly one way to tell them apart. And it is not how warm the person sounds when they say your name. It is whether anybody ever gave you a place to sign. That was all I wanted back. Not the 4 years, not the $2,865. One narrow column on the right-hand side of the page. You cannot ask a person for a favor and then hand it to them as a gift. Thank you for staying with this one all the way to the end. This story is fiction, written to be sat with and thought about rather than acted on. If any part of it sounded like your own family, you are not being difficult and you are not being cold. Deciding what you can give and saying it out loud before someone writes it down for you is not selfishness. It is the only way anyone finds out what your yes is worth.